Join us live this Saturday for a very special historic show on Big Jet TV at the Wings Museum in Balcombe, West Sussex in the UK. We'll bring you a start-up of this Rolls-Royce Merlin engine live on the show. We'll also be taking a look around the museum and exploring the exhibits, as well as a detailed look around this beautifully restored engine. So set your notifications and join me live. Showtime approximately 10:30 AM. We'll see you there. Good morning, folks, and welcome. Thought we'd just play that little bit out at the beginning. This was that promo that you just saw was the day before I actually went down to the Wings Museum just to do a little bit of B-roll and shoot a bit of B-roll footage and do a little intro for you guys, just to, or for the audience, just to let them know what we were going to be planning to do the next day. What you're seeing here on your screen is a Tamiya model of a Lancaster 2, and the way that you can tell the Lancaster 2 is by the props, because these were the wooden props. Very sophisticated coating that they used on the props, and kind of like a wire mesh almost mixed in with this coating that they used on the props, on the wooden props. And what is interesting is that the variant, the Mark III that followed the Lancaster Mark II, obviously, was with the metal props, the alloy props. Now the problems with the alloy prop was that, in fact, it was the the problem with the alloy prop was obviously, if they and regularly they did do this, they would have instances where the undercarriage would not retract. And as a result of that, they had to belly land on airstrips or wherever. Obviously, if they brought the aircraft down in a field, in farmland, miles away from anywhere, they would obviously send a crew out to break the aircraft down into its recoverable segments, and then transport that back to an airbase where it could obviously be used for spare parts. Obviously not put back together, but used for spare parts. And of course, the problem with if they landed one of these aircraft on one of the concrete runways that they had, that they were starting to put together all across York and the northern part of the UK, northeast part of the UK, in Lincolnshire and Yorkshire, and some in Norfolk, where the US Air Force bases were. The aircraft, as it came down, obviously, if it had wooden blades, as per these, the blades would immediately splinter and break away, and the engines would continue to turn, and therefore you'd save the engine. If you used if the aircraft came down belly landed, the props would obviously stop immediately, and they would obviously destroy the internal moving parts of the engine, and therefore destroy the engine. So it seemed a little bit crazy that they moved from a wooden prop to an alloy prop, but the alloy prop just gave them more lift. It was a bigger prop and gave them more opportunity to get the aircraft at higher altitude. So anyway, what you're seeing there is a Lancaster 2. A great friend of mine, he became a great friend of mine, David Fellows. He was a rear gunner with 460 Squadron. This is a replica of his aircraft, named Beryl. Oboe, she was. They didn't have the alphabet as we know it back in those days. O for orange, or O for oboe, R for Roger, A for apple, that kind of thing. So it was only till late. It wasn't until later on that they came up with the aviation alphabet that we are currently we're familiar with. So Dave Fellows, he was a rear gunner. did the full missions with 460. 460 were with the Royal Australian Air Force, and he was a lovely man. He enjoyed a drink, and he enjoyed good times with his fellow crew members. Fortunately for him, apart from one, he went through the entire operations with one crew. He was very, very lucky indeed, because obviously a lot of times certain crews would have their pilot would be shot at during a raid, or succumbed to shrapnel from splinters that are thrown up by these ground guns, these ACAC guns, all kinds of crazy things that used to go on. Fortunately for this crew, they made it through the war, and Dave made it through. Lovely fella, got married after the war, and spent his life most in the last 20 years or so. He spent travelling the UK, giving lectures, meeting people, going to museums. Absolutely lovely fella. Now there's this lovely lady called Cherry Grieveson, who looks after a dwindling, I have to say, a dwindling number of Bomber Command air crew, from all different walks from all different points of the aircraft, gunners, navigators, flight engineers, pilots, and so on and so forth, and bomb aimers as well. And of course, so these guys, Cherry basically travels the country when they can, obviously, to do book signings and so on and so forth. And I was very fortunate to be on one of those book signings. It was actually at RAF Hendon, I seem to remember, and I was in the lineup where I was in the line getting my book signed by all these wonderful heroes, as I call them, and I came across Dave. I started chatting to him. He was very talkative. And he said, "What do you know?" I said to him, "What did you do after the war?" He said, "I kept on flying." I said, "Oh, that's fantastic. Who did you fly with?" And he said he was a loadmaster with British Eagle. And I said, "Oh, that's amazing. My dad flew with British Eagle." He goes, "Oh yeah, what was his name?" And I said, "Robin Dyer." He goes, "No way. I flew with Robin." So can you believe that after all those years, I meet up with, our paths crossed, and it was a wonderful crossing of paths, because Dave, I love to talk about the history of Bomber Command as much as I can. And fortunately for me, a lot of the older crews, they're not really into talking so much, whereas with Dave, he was very, very talkative. He loved to talk about his experiences. He was obviously the rear gunner, almost the loneliest place on a bomber during a night flight, during a night mission. It has to be said, stuck all the way at the back of the aircraft. Fortunately, 460 Squadron were actually given the opportunity to test out new equipment called the AGLT, the Automatic Gun Laying Turret, which basically had an infrared sensor on the back of it, which basically tracked any movement of aircraft behind it, which were enemy night fighters like Me-110s and so on and so forth. But lovely fella, lovely guy, and I was very fortunate enough to spend many hours and times with him on his travels. Behind you there, you can see a fantastic picture which I bought a number of years ago, and this is of course depicting bombers returning from a night raid, and being escorted there by a Spitfire, as you can see, come over the Dutch coast, heading back home in the sunrise, and of course a very poignant image, as you can see there. A beautiful picture, an absolutely beautiful picture, and thank you. I thank Dave and all of his wonderful colleagues, of course, for doing what they did for us during the war. But anyway, listen, there we go. Hello, folks. How you doing? Welcome everybody. Hope you're doing well, hope you're keeping well, and put me Sunday best on today just because of out a little bit of respect for the for the young boys, the heroes of Bomber Command. So what you're seeing here this morning, folks, is a show that we did last year in, I think it was August or September, one of the two, August, September of last year, at the Wings Museum in Sussex. You might want to look that up, folks, the Wings Museum down there in Sussex. I'm not getting that light on me, am I? Got a bit of a dark side to me. But there we go. Let's just have a little look here. Let's just go over there. Even worse. But anyway, yes, this was at the Wings Museum in Sussex. A beautiful spot, has to be said. And it was on a Sunday, and it was just like today as well. Beautiful sunny day, broken cloud, great conditions, perfect and ideal for being outside as well as inside the museum. The museum itself is relatively small, but it's a bit like the TARDIS. They've got a lot of stuff in there, folks. And as I explained last night, these two brothers have made it their mission in life to go out to Germany and recover as many aircraft that were lost during the Bomber Command campaign from 39 to 45. And of course the worst time was around about 41 to 43. Those were the times, 41 especially, when all they had were Wellingtons, Hamdens, very, very, very basic stuff before the big four-engine bombers came on stream, which were the first one being, of course, the Halifax, and then the Lancaster Bomber, which was originally the Manchester, which had horrendous problems with its twin engines, overheating, so later on in the war, it got a little bit easier for them as we basically destroyed the defences of Germany and were able to sort of like, you know, strategically bomb, because obviously it was terrible. War is a terrible thing, but let's all understand that these boys were doing what they had to do. You know, to do what they had to do was to defend their country. And of course, this was all at night time. They had very little idea of what was going on down below them at around about 10 to 15,000 feet. Of course, when they got back, the news was not really something that was read or listened to in their barracks, because they just wanted to sleep, you know, and reminisce. And of course, sometimes, you know, there'd be 7 empty bunks there where there was an aircraft that didn't return, and 7 new crew members would come in there and replace those empty bunks. Very, very brave young men, it has to be said. And one of those brave young men, just one of those very brave young men, he's 97 years old now. I was very fortunate to meet him. His name is George Dunn. He's a DFC. He's got the Distinguished Flying Cross for what he did during the war. He flew with 76 Squadron on the Halifax on 300 ops. That would have been the Mark II Halifax. And he was actually involved in the very famous, and I'm sure quite a few of us are aware of the Peenemünde raid, which was the V2 rocket installations there over in north. Well, actually, it wasn't even in Germany. It was Peenemünde in. Sorry, my forgiveness. Forgive me for my lack of geographical knowledge at this particular time. But anyway, Peenemünde was somewhere where the Germans were developing the rockets, which fortunately we got out there. Our intelligence found out about this place, and we went out there and bombed the living hell out of it. And of course, George was with 76 Squadron, who was he did 30 ops with them, and then he went on to join after being on a conversion unit and training pilots as well. He went on to 608 Squadron on the Mosquitoes on the Night Strike Force, which is just as incredible when you think about it. What he has achieved, and he did around about 40 odd ops with 608 Squadron. And started flying in June 43, which is around about the time when things were starting to get a little bit easier for Bomber Command, because they had better aircraft, more sophistication, and of course their navigational aids and weather radars and all that kind of stuff was all starting to come into effect. As you can see underneath, slung underneath that Halifax is an H2S dome, which is like a radar, which basically is a ground radar, which basically penetrated the clouds to give them a good idea of where they were in relation to the target. Anyway, listen, folks, this is a very poignant moment when George Dunn comes and gives a little speech to the folks who were attending this very special day. You'll see there's a couple of other vets sat on the front row as well, and George is very lively, and he's still very, very lively. And a big shout out to you, George. I know he probably won't be watching. I've been in touch with Sherry, and hopefully Sherry's watching. Sherry's on Facebook. Hello, Sherry. Thank you so much, and it's great to see you here. And hello to everybody on the Daily Express. I know this is something kind of up your street, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. We're going to take a look around, meet up with Daniel, who's the guy that runs the Wings Museum with his brother, and we get a look around the museum, and then after that, during the show, we will fire up this Mark II. It is the Rolls-Royce Merlin Double X, the XX. It's the 10, basically, which was one of the later variants of the Merlin. Very, very successful, and of course powered us to win the war with the Lancaster Bomber, the Spitfire, the Hurricane, the Mosquito, of course, the P-51 Mustang, and early variants of the Wellington as well as the Hampden. I believe the Hampden was powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin, extremely powerful, extremely effective engine, and this old girl was recovered from Germany with the 4 other engines from a Halifax that got shot down on a night raid in 1943. The 7 crew members unfortunately didn't make it, and of course but one of these engines has been lovingly restored and brought back to life, literally. And you're going to see that thing fire up today, and it might bring a tear to a few people's eyes. It certainly did with me on the day, especially with George being present. So enjoy it, folks. This is the Wings Museum in Sussex, and special guest is George Dunn DFC, ex-Halifax pilot. Enjoy it. So I'm here. Dan's going to be here. Yeah. It's my right foot. It's my right foot. This will be Dan's left foot. 'cause we've got to do titles anyway as well, so. Okay. Well, no, just for the, I don't know, just for the, yeah. Seen the hat? It's good, isn't it? Churchy.
Oh, really?
She's there, is she? Oh my God, she's got 55 now. Yeah. That goes to show. I don't like to use the word desperation, but blimey, you know, when you have to go as far as going to Scarborough. Do what? I've seen these Richmond golf rules, temporary rules, 1940 during the Blitz. It's just amazing. It's just, golf is such a snobbery game. Players are asked to collect bomb and shrapnel splinters to save these causing damage to the mowing machines. In competitions during gunfire or while bombs are falling, players may take cover without penalty for ceasing play. The positions of known delayed action bombs are marked by red flags at a reasonably, but not guaranteed, safe distance, therefore. Shrapnel and or bomb splinters on the fairways or in bunkers with a... Yeah, it is just fantastic. It is really funny. Yeah. And, or you see him writing down your pen. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, there's always been the illegal golf ball. Yeah, yeah. I think the funniest thing is we've done it before, where you buy those golf balls that when you hit them, they blow up. And we went before where we were close about to see hold on, we're distracting. Someone runs on, changes his ball, swaps his ball out for one of those balls, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. And then he goes to tee off, bang, big, massive puff of dust. Brilliant. Oh. And there's nothing worse than that, because you've got to wait. Mind you, you can charge it whilst if you've got them on high plate, you can take it whilst charging it. So it might be a bit of thank you! It might be a little bit of peace and quiet down your way then, if those guys get Yes, yeah. Hi, Dan. Okay, Dan's here, Jilly. We're everything's done and we're ready to walk and roll. Okay, I'm just going to do something, Jilly. Just checking audio. 1 2 1 2 1 2. Can I hear the audio, please? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I'm just going to move it around a little bit. Da 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 da. Check check. 1 2 1 2 1 2. Check check. 1 2 1 2. Check check. Yeah, I've just tightened up the battery cover. That's all. Okay, that's good. That's good. So this position here is okay. 1 2 1 2. Check check. Perfect. Okay. Okay. Perfect. Right. That's a nice noise, isn't it? Okay. Oh no, 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 no. Hold on a minute. Some fella in a JCB offloading. You're right, mate. We're ready to go. Just want to make sure this bloke's not going to be going minutes.
He's also got a habit of, so the farmer's got a habit of going, you know.
Oh, did it? Okay. Okay, check 1 2 1 2. Okay, Wes. Good. So when I hand you the mic,
Yeah.
you want to be holding it like that, yeah? Be careful you don't touch the. I mean, you wouldn't be able to.
Okay.
Okay. We can shut that door, can't we?
That door.
Yeah.
It might make a noise when people come in because it has a habit of self-closing and banging. It's probably better open.
Right. Okay. Just want to make sure, see whether this guy is planning to do any loading and offloading and reversing. Not worth asking him, no.
What's he got?
Does it? Does it? keeps going on and off and on. So we're just going to walk around with it like that. We're just going to... Oh, maybe it's because I'm far away from the receiver. Okay, I'm right by the receiver now. I'm not very far from it. So blah blah blah. Check. Can you talk? 1 2 1 2. Everything's fine now. So there's no. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Okay. It hasn't got a very good. It's not a very good thing distance-wise. So I'll just accept that. I'm just walking outside now. Hold on a second. Let's just make sure that he's. Okay, ready to go live, GP? Hold on a minute. Let me just put the mic over here. I'm gonna walk away for a second. You're not gonna hear me. Just want to make sure that. Well, we'll do that. Yeah. So we could just grab him later. Right. Here's my position, Dan. If you want to put your left foot up to there.
Yep.
Okay, GP. Are you ready? Okay. Give me a. Just check your audio. 1 2. Check 1 2. So I'm just going to, so Dan, you're going to walk us around, blah, 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 bang. You're going to grab that, and then you just hold that tight in that position, sort of around about there for your walk around. Yeah? Okay. So you don't need to be doing that sort of, it's not karaoke, son. Okay, GP, whenever you're ready. Give me a countdown and live on all channels. Well, hello everybody, good morning and welcome to Sussex, a beautiful county in the UK, in southern UK. Morning to everybody watching around the world. We are at the Wings Museum, a fabulous little gem right here in the heart of Sussex. And I'm here with the curator, Dan Hunt. Hello, Dan. How you doing?
Hello, I'm fine, thank you.
Good, good, good. So today we're here for a very special occasion. We are going to be firing up a Merlin engine.
That's right, yeah. It's quite a unique engine in that it was recovered from a crash site in Germany. So it flew on a combat mission on the 28th of July on its way to Hamburg, and it was shot down by a night fighter. What's unique really is the fact that the crew lost their lives in this crash, so we run it in their memory, really. And George Dunn, who's with us today, he's an ex-Halifax pilot. He should be with us in the next hour. He actually flew Halifax's operationally. He will be pressing the start button, but before that, we do normally tell the story of what happened that night, and we read the names and ages of the crew. And then you hear that unique sound, you know, of the Halifax.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, not just the story that comes with the engine, also the story of the restoration of the engine, because I believe around about 90% of the engine is still original.
Well, that's it, yes. I mean, we've only really repaired what we've had to repair, because right from the outset, we recognised the loss of the human life, you know, in this crash. So we wanted to respect that. We wanted to repair the original sort of case in... So that went for Specialist Welding with Flight International. Some of the restoration was done here, and it took about 8 years. So there's a lot of work gone into it, and perhaps we'll walk around there later and I'll show you the other 3, which we haven't yet done. Whether we ever will or not, you never know, but
yeah,
we've certainly got one today that's in a running condition.
Yeah, I mean, the other 3 being around there is a permanent memorial for those guys, which is fantastic. And I know that, and we'll have a look around the museum shortly, but I know that you do respect it right to the point where you've actually done memorials and you've actually put something, created something yourself that you've put at the crash site. Before.
Yes, yeah, that's right. We've done about 8 memorials now, mainly in Belgium, a few in the UK as well. But really, I think, like, from an early age, when we started investigating these crash sites, you can't help but get kind of emotionally attached with what you're finding. Like, sometimes there was a case of a Sterling in Belgium, and just literally underneath the leaf layer, we found an RAF cat badge. We found items like that which really kind of get your emotions stirring, and you suddenly sort of think, well, no one knows that all this happened here. There's nothing, nobody knows who they were, you know. So we put a lot of effort into tracing families, and on the case of the Sterling, we've traced all but one, and they've all been out there, even from Canada. And whilst they can visit the graves, knowing where it happened and standing on that spot, it's important for them, and also the next generations that are taking an interest in what sort of granddad did or their great-granddad did. And we also put all the information online, so that attracts other sort of families in who are trying to find out about their relatives. And it just leaves something at the crash site that says, this happened here, you know. I'd like to think that would kind of preserve it from ever having something like a mini mart put on it or something like that, you know, or, you know, people know that this is kind of a bit of a sacred location, if you like.
Yeah, fantastic. And also, I mean, the museum itself covers the whole of the Second World War, and you've got a huge number of artefacts here that have been both recovered and donated, and you've even bought in as well.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I think what we recognised quite early on, because we were out in Russia in about 2002, 2003, so we dragged back a lot of aircraft that were ex-Lend-Lease. One of those we're actually restoring in the workshop, which I'll show you guys later. But we're sort of, we recognise that World War II, that you can't really, well, you can, but you can't just really focus on one particular part of it. You kind of, because everything interlinks and tells the story. So here we have memorabilia relating to Japanese, the Russians, you know, all nations really, the Germans as well, you know. We're non-political. It's about remembering young guys that went to war, many because they had to. A lot of them paid the ultimate sacrifice, and it's really remembering that, not necessarily the reasons and the political reasons why all of this happened.
Yes,
just
indeed.
To preserve their memory.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's the best way to run a museum, is just not to be politically involved. Is just respect and they were young. I mean, we're talking about, I believe, the pilot of JD 150, which is the Halifax, the engine that we're going to be seeing firing up later. He was 19 years old.
Yeah,
I mean, 19.
Yeah.
That means he was the skipper. He was the captain. You know, looking after a crew that were possibly older than himself. You know, but that is how you can become so emotionally attached with these projects, is because of how young these crews were.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a tall order, a 19-year-old flying in quite a primitive time as well, like navigation, flying in conditions which are very challenging, very hazardous, not just the combat hazards, but just the literally flying operationally at that time. But you think of a 19-year-old who's too young to drive a car, but he can take a fully bombed up Halifax to Germany and back again.
In the dark.
In the dark. And often they had so many bombs on them that, you know, if anything happened on takeoff, it would be game over. They knew all this. They served quite early in 1943, around about a time where the survival rate at Bomber Command was pretty grim, really. I mean, at one point in Bomber Command, it was like a 1 in 3 survival rate. And of course, whilst that wasn't publicised, these guys could work it out. They could see the empty bunks. They could see who was going out on a raid and who wasn't coming back. And when you think that they went through that, and then they did it time and time again.
Yeah.
You know, and these guys, they're actually on their 3rd operation. And what's kind of sort of unfortunate for them is that they ran into a night fighter ace, and they were still gaining their experience at that time.
Yes.
So we know that they were intercepted at 14,000 feet. Now, when they crashed, they were flying at a very horizontal angle, and it just nosed into a very soft area, which is why the engines are in such good condition and why we've been able to restore one of them. But we can only really assume what happened, that perhaps they were corkscrewing to try and shake the German night fighter off. They might have done that several times, and then by the time they've kind of recovered, taken stock of their damage, perhaps some of the crew have already been killed in that attack, confusion, panic. I mean, we do know that, you know, it appeared that the aircraft was under control. None of them got out, so they were all killed. The aircraft was on fire, and you can only really imagine the fear, you know, what those guys went through. And I think the least that we can do is to remember them, and to make sure that future generations that come to the museum and the artefacts are important for the new generation. Because, you know, pick up history book, I don't know about you, but it doesn't really I don't really get the kind of feeling for it. Whereas if I'm handling an artefact or something that's been there, it kind of, well, makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up.
Absolutely. I mean, we've known each other for a while now, and we were on a dig together with HR 796, the Halifax, that went down. A different situation on a training mission. They all managed to bail out at 10,000 feet, so the aircraft went in on its own. So a totally different scenario. And but again, like you say, when you recover an artifact, even a switch or a lever, knowing that particular item was handled by either member of the crew, be it from the gun turret or from the flight deck or from the wireless operator or the navigator. You know, it's just it brings home that personal, poignant part of it.
Well, you were the sort of first person to touch that since that raid or that flight.
Yes.
And in the case of Halifax, you're mentioning, you know, again, they were in training and, you know, operational training, but it demonstrates that even those that went through training at the time, I mean, there was a huge amount of losses incurred in training.
Yes.
So a lot of these guys had already run the gauntlet to get that far.
Yeah.
Then the next gauntlet was to fly enough raids where they might get a little bit of experience, you know, that might just give them that kind of extra survival odds. But as we know, I mean, over 55,000 Bomber Command air crews were lost. And that's what really the Bomber Boys event, the veteran signing, is all about. Is basically the upkeep of the memorial in Green Park, but Cherry will probably tell you a little bit about that a bit later on.
We mentioned the Bomber Boys and Cherry. I mean, you do you have regular ex-Bomber Command crews that come here, sign books for people, and tell their stories. It's just fantastic that they're still around and still able to tell their story.
Yeah.
And you've got a few of them arriving today, I believe, and we're going to possibly even have a chat with them as well.
Yeah, I very much hope so. I think we've got about 6 attending today, and one of them actually came into the museum on Friday, and he only lives in Haywards Heath, and he was ground crew working on Lancasters with 75 Squadron, and he was telling us some of the stories of the challenges that they had, you know, bearing in mind they had to keep these Lancs in a safe operational condition, and quite a challenge. And he was describing some of the very basic tools he had, you know, and he was saying that they were actually using items of ground equipment as kind of mallets to hit things, and, you know, a very sort of unconventional way of doing it, but if it worked, they had to find ways around things. They had to work with what they had.
And all this in all weathers, winter time most importantly, because the winter offensive was the bomber offensives was in the winter nights when they were longer, so that's why they carried out their missions, most of them in the winter time. And of course the ground crews having to work tirelessly with the aircraft outside in freezing conditions, heavy rain, regardless, because a high percentage of the airfields in Lincolnshire and so on and so forth didn't actually have maintenance hangars. Everything was done at dispersals, so like you say, very few tools to work with, and just again, more commitment from even just the ground crews.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we kind of need to remember, is that whilst the aircrew are a vital part of that, there's a whole infrastructure of people keeping them operational, keeping them in the air. And I think, you know, we need to remember them as well. I think what they did is just as important. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been any Lancasters or Halifaxes or Bombers operational. But, you know, they often, as you say, they worked in freezing conditions. Some of them would construct like a little temporary shed with perhaps a little wood burner in there, so they could attempt to maybe warm their fingers up so that they could feel things again. But they, you know, very rarely did an aircraft go in a hangar unless it was for major modification or major repair. Most of them were just worked on out in the open, as you say, in all weathers. They couldn't just say, oh, it's raining, we'll wait for that rainstorm to stop. They had a target to meet, so...
Absolutely.
You know...
Dan, let's take a look around the museum. I mean, you've got so much here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hand you the mic. I'm going to go mobile, and we'll have a little walk round. Should we start in maybe Fighter Command?
Yes.
Okay, right. And I'll let you deal with all of that. Okay, Jilly, stand by. This is... Okay.
So you've got to be careful how you do that.
You what?
You've got to be careful how you do that in case you unplug something.
Yes. Unfortunately, it's just one. It is just one plug, so all good. Oh, okay. Just cut Jilly off. GP, go for comms one more time. You know, we're a nice clean band turn up. And we'll slide. And we are now mobile. Okay.
Okay.
So, let's walk our way around.
Yep. So
tell us where we're going then, Dan.
Right. Well, we're going into the fighter offensive section, and I'll take you straight to one of our major exhibits, which is the cockpit section of a Bristol Beaufighter. Now, this particular one was actually found in a scrapyard in South Africa. And it was very kindly restored by a friend of ours, Rob Greinhart, in Australia, in exchange for a wrecked Oscar that we had recovered from the Kuril Islands in Russia. And now, you know, a lot of it is totally original, but obviously it's been restored. But it's a nice exhibit because it shows people the office, if you like, of this particular aircraft. And what I find absolutely mind-blowing is that through the section behind the pilot's seat here, there would have been a big box section of a wing spar, and the pilot wasn't wearing his parachute. The parachute was actually hung up in a rack here. So if he got into trouble, not only did he have to try and keep control of the aircraft, he had to jettison the escape hatch here, and then that would jettison, but then he'd have to put his own parachute on and somehow get out. And you think that if you're in an aircraft that's barely flying or even perhaps going down, I mean, it's just amazing to think that they had to put their own parachute on and control the aircraft. I just find that kind of scary, really.
It is incredible. I mean, when you look at the aircraft as a whole, it looks quite big.
Yes.
But then when you look at the cockpit, as you say, the office, it's very, very compact, very tight, and like you say, in a situation where the aircraft's out of control, very little opportunity. And of course, don't forget, the pilot was generally always the last out. He'd try and keep the aircraft in a straight, level flight so that his crew could get out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you look at it, there's just so many knobs, levers, dials, and you just think that in stressful circumstances where perhaps there's terrible things occurring, you've got to monitor all this. You've got to know what's going on. You've got to make split-second decisions, which could not only cost your own life but the lives of the crew that are with you. So the kind of strains that are on any skipper of any aircraft, I think, are just sort of quite amazing. I'm quite certain that if I was around in those times, I'm not sure that I am of the kind of moral fibre to have carried out that kind of work.
Yes.
I may well have been one of the ground crew that was helping to fix them, but
yes.
I just think that a lot of them had no experience of flying aircraft. They were kind of called up to do their duty. And let's face it, that they were rushed through. A lot of them went to Canada for training, but it's still an awful lot for a young person to pick up. And I guess maybe age works in your favour, because as you get older, you tend to think about things a bit more. Whereas
when you're younger, you're a little bit more sort of like go get it, sort of like we can do this, and go fight for your country, basically. Yeah,
and it's going to be, an adventure, and, there's all that kind of element of it. But I guess reality kicked in quite quickly for these guys.
Yeah, very quickly. Okay,
so I'll wander on. So that's the Beaufighter. Just to point out, we did just touch on the memorials that we do. Just the connection to the Beaufighter is that we researched an aircraft that crashed just a couple of miles away from the museum, which was a night fighter Beaufighter that was shot down just at the very end of the Battle of Britain, and they were on a patrol in London looking for German bombers, and they were returning to RAF Red Hill in very bad weather. And this is another kind of remarkable thing, is that RAF Red Hill had no runway lighting at all. It had a gooseneck flare, which is basically like a watering can with a flame at the end filled with fuel, one at each end of the runway. And they would have to basically line their aircraft up using just that. And in bad weather, a lot of these crews, and including these guys, they were basically trying to locate Red Hill, and they just unfortunately hit the very tops of some beech trees at a place in Balcombe and crashed. And very experienced pilots that had served previous combat in the Battle of Britain flying Blenheims, but at the end of the day it was a beech tree in the dark that cost them their lives. And it's just the hazards, really. Literally, even though you've returned from an operation, until you're actually safely on the ground, you're not home, are you?
Exactly.
And this kind of highlights that.
And so many of them did get caught out by the weather in the UK, fog.
Yeah.
I know that some of the airfields had FIDO, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Where they burnt fuel to disperse the fog and obviously give the crews an indication of where the landing strip was. But even so, coming back to the UK, so many times the aircraft, huge squadrons of bombers were held in holding patterns before they could land, or having to divert, where a lot of collisions happened as well, which is just it's just there's so much to it, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
So much to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
if do you want to?
Over here, just have a
Yep,
quick
that's
here, which is
that's the remains of a Hawker Hurricane. So obviously many people will know all about the Hawker Hurricane, but for those that aren't sort of as familiar, it was basically quite a primitive design, a very strong aircraft. It was basically the prominent aircraft in the Battle of Britain, but it was wooden fabric. So if you're looking at an aircraft that's been sitting around for 50 or 60 years on a crash site, obviously the fabric and the wood are long gone, but these are, what's left of it. You've got the centre section there. There's the bottom of the control stick. The seat would have been mounted in that area. And the undercarriage is still in the upper position on this one. But this is a Lend-Lease Hurricane that went to Russia, so a lot of the ex-RAF battle-weary aircraft were sent to Russia to kind of assist them with their efforts out there.
yes.
Now, I mean, for those that visit the museum, you'll see that there's also bullet holes all over the place on this thing. I mean, it was riddled, so obviously we're not exactly sure, being Russia, it's remote. We don't even know what happened to the pilot. I mean, if you manage to force land, Russia is a hell of a place to try and, get out from. If it's winter alone, whether you'd make it through the night with the sort of, the temperatures that are out there.
Yes.
But shall I take you into the bomber section, which might just be a nice contrast from the fighters?
Lynx trainer here, which is quite interesting. First ever, that's what saved a lot of people, is the early training. More of your restoration projects here, which is fantastic as well.
Yeah, that's an A26 Invader, which has been totally restored here at the museum.
Yeah, I remember when that was. When that was outside in pieces. Done a fantastic job.
There were people around that were thinking, like, is this actually achievable? But the one thing that we have here at the museum are a lot of volunteers.
Dedicated volunteers.
Totally dedicated.
Who will do so much towards...
if you get a team of 10 people working on it regularly, then this is what's possible. But myself, it would take me my whole life to do something like that. But
so
this is an air raid shelter, an original one that we got from a garden in Kent, from Hornchurch, and it was used as a coal bunker, as many of them were at the end of the war. Later on we'll have the sounds in there of an air raid, and again, very good for sort of school children who are learning about World War II. And obviously the civilian side is as important. I think with World War II it affected everybody, those at home, those serving abroad. This that you're looking at now is, we're pretty sure that there are only 4 of these turrets. I might be wrong, someone might correct me on that, but I believe there are only 4. 2 of them are here, but it's an FN4 gun turret, and it's from a Whitley bomber, so it's a rear gun turret.
What is remarkable when you look at it up close like this is how tight it was in there, and you can see why. Tail End Charlie was basically the favourite target for a night fighter or for a fighter, purely because he's at the back. He's defending the aircraft. He's the
first thing you knock out, isn't he?
Yeah.
If you're attacking, he's shooting at you, you're shooting at him. I mean, it's a battle of survival. But I mean, I've not even attempted to try and get in it. I know better, but I mean, as you say, it is so confined, the space in there, and they could be sort of 8 or 9 hours sitting in there.
And they don't have an opportunity to wear their parachute, so if the circumstances do arise, they've got to open those doors, get their parachute, and then hopefully turn the turret all the way round and bail out. But all of that happening while an aircraft's circling all the way to the ground, centrifugal forces, and
well, it's a bit like if people were on a roller coaster ride. Imagine trying to perform a task in the middle of doing a loop on the roller coaster. I mean, achievable, but very, very difficult, and especially in that confined kind of area that they've got, because I mean you've got 4 great big buckets of .303 ammunition there, which is obviously very important for a gun turret, but it really limits the sort of space available to the gunner.
Right. Okay.
So
let's move around to obviously you've got other sections in here which we can have a look at that with our viewers a bit later on, but obviously with the time constraints. So this is
the bomber section, and it encompasses the RAF Bomber Command, the 8th Air Force. Again, the 8th Air Force, the US 8th Air Force were bombing during the day, and the RAF were bombing at night. And I should imagine that combination, I mean, would have given. They would have had no time in Germany to recover from the night's raid, because they'd be having incoming raids again, and I think the bombing campaign played a vital part in, the success of D-Day ultimately, in attacking communications, but also factories and, the fact that they were running out of supplies. I mean, it's all down to the fact that there was a huge bombing campaign. And on both sides, like in the Blitz and in the bomber raids over Germany and France, and there were a lot of civilian casualties, which is just unfortunately one of those tragic things of war at that time, and and it still happens today, doesn't it?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Often, the civilians that are around these factories are the workers, of course, that work in the factories.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I recently went back to Halifax, the HR 796 crash site. I found a very small, tiny little component, and on it, at the bottom, was written the manufacturer's name, and it said Coventry.
Really? Yeah.
So, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Because the Germans bombed Coventry. Yeah. So they possibly could have found a crashed aircraft, gone through all the componentry and looked for any telltale signs of the originality of it and places where these components were built. They've got that. He said, right, well, that's Coventry. They're built in Coventry, so let's go and bomb Coventry.
Well, we know a little bit of that went on, because the Japanese, when they put their construction numbers onto data plates, they vastly exaggerated which number of the production it was, so that you would think they had thousands and thousands of these, but in reality they might be barely breaking 500, and again it's that part of deception. Deception in war is vital, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. This is an impressive artifact, which you've is this, where did you get this from?
Well, we recovered this from the eastern part of Russia, and it's a Douglas A-20 Boston, so it's an American-built aircraft. And if you see the wing right up in the corner there, you'll see the American star with the meatball, which was the very early US sort of national insignia. But obviously, after Pearl Harbor, when people were seeing meatballs dropping bombs and attacking them, they very rapidly deleted that red circle, because from the ground, obviously, it could easily be mistaken as being enemy. But so that shows that it is an early Boston that's been used by the US Army Air Force, and then sent out to Russia to do its bit. And basically, it was attacked by a Bf-109. Again, we can't say for sure what happened to the crew, but the thing was basically laying in the woods, where we've sort of had it recovered, and we've just decided to leave it as it is, because this is real, this is the reality. And this is the thing about the museum, is that it's not a collection of perfect aircraft, but the point is, if it's damaged, or it's got a hole in it, or it's got bullet holes or shrapnel damage, there is an important story behind it. Yes. This damage is all at a cost. If this was a perfectly preserved example, it probably would never have seen any action in World War II at all. But, the importance is the reality of it.
Of course. So just behind you there, a little bit of sort of like the American corner, so to speak, B-17 stuff.
Well, I might just point out, if I just point to it, that item there.
Yes, the gun sight, is that?
That's a gun sight from a 50 caliber machine gun, but that was the very first thing that we found, and in actual fact, in the early 1980s, my dad actually found that while we were walking down the side of an old airfield, and he showed it to his two sons. I was 7 and my brother would have been 10 or 11. And it captured our imagination. We were at the age where we were building airfix models and, you know, watching the war films. And we went into the woods and we started coming out with all sorts of things. And I think that planted the seed, which then in adult life was able to kind of grow from a collection that started under the bed to a lock-up, to putting on exhibitions locally for just one day and then packing it all away again, to eventually forming the museum as it is today. And the thing is, the exhibits got bigger and bigger, and they continue to do so as well.
Yes.
There are just so many opportunities and so many items that we're running out of space a little bit. So
you're looking to expand, or
yeah, definitely looking to expand. I mean, as I say, the museum is very well received, and I think public opinion is definitely very important, because, you know, if you're the curator of a manager of a museum, the public, you're delivering a message, you're a custodian of all this stuff. I mean, none of us live forever. The idea is that this is here for future generations, and that it carries on delivering the message that it has. So, you know, public opinion is important. If it's well received, that message is being delivered.
Yes. Well, I think it's fantastic what you've done, and your commitment to it as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I can't take. I mean, it's obviously my brother, and we have the benefit that we have a whole team of volunteers, which enable us to operate. We're now open 6 days a week. I'll get that plug in.
Yeah. No, that is something that I did notice. You're now open, because you were just Saturdays and Sundays, wasn't it?
We were, yeah. For about 13 or 14 years, we were open just Saturdays and Sundays. But now we've got a few more volunteers. We are looking for more volunteers as well, I might add.
Yes.
I appreciate that some of your viewers might be a little bit further afield than are able to attend, but
yes,
it's worth putting it out there. So what we're looking at here now, that is actually a wheel from the Halifax that you were mentioning. I don't know if you saw that on your last visit. From Chailey.
Is it? Is that the Chailey? Is that the Chailey Halifax?
And do you know there was an auction just before Christmas where a collection was being broken up and sold off, and I was online and I was buying a few items, but do you know, it was on there, it was a Halifax wheel hub, a very poor picture of it, no history, and I purchased it.
That's incredible.
When I went to collect it, there's a label on it, and it's even got the guy's phone number of who found it, but it's from Chailey. So it has a
Chailey, yeah.
So it's kind of come home, really, because it's joined the other artefacts which we got from that aircraft.
Yes.
Just one of those examples of sometimes it's a really small world.
Yes, indeed. Just happened to find it, and there it is. And that went down near Chailey Heritage, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, you're the expert on this one. I mean, you've put a lot of your sort of time and effort into researching it. And,
yes.
So, yeah, we've got the story here.
That's incredible. So there was a lot of stuff that obviously did, it got dispersed, didn't it? And like you say, that's good that it's come home.
Yeah, you never know, there might be other people out there with some bits of it that they'd like to see on display and join the other parts, you know.
And this is something I put together as well, just a memorial of the Halifax Bomber itself that we did, which does actually show some information on the aircraft itself, and of course the crash card down there, and other artefacts. That's a panel I put together as well, which is donated to the museum, and that's the one that from our recovery, wasn't it?
Yeah, nothing massive there, but some really
has we know what it was, you know, which is explainable.
Like you got the fragment of the propeller there with the yellow tip on it. You know, I mean,
which is
So, you know, and as you were talking about data plates of manufacturers, there's one right there. You know, and I'm sure, the Germans, they would have used that information. You almost think, is it better to just say not, you know, just don't mention where it's built?
Indeed.
But then maybe if there's a problem with that component, you need to be able to trace it back, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Stores and part numbers and so on and so forth. So these three are the other three engines.
So yes.
From JD 150, is it?
Yep, Halifax JD 150. They're Merlin 20 engines. So it's from a Mark II Halifax that had the wooden propellers and the Merlin engines. Later Marks had the radial engines, but these are as recovered. Now I'll point out now, whilst we're here, the state of the exhausts.
Yes.
They are all the same. They've all basically been crunched on impact as they've gone into the ground, and they were found at a depth of about 1.5 metres, so they weren't actually that deep, and it crashed in a very peaty, boggy area. But the fact that the propeller hubs, the propeller assembly are still attached is unusual, because if an aircraft shot down and it's spiralling out of control, it could be doing 450 miles an hour when it hits the ground.
Which then they just fragment, wouldn't
they? They just literally fragment into just pieces, you know. I mean, the shock load to the engine would probably just blow it apart into pieces, you know. So unless you're lucky enough to find one that perhaps the engine's been shut down, you know, where it's been feathered and actually shut down so it's not running at the time, then you stand more of a chance. But if you imagine all these components turning at the RPM that they're turning, and then suddenly someone stops that.
Yeah. Well, the good thing with these, with the wooden props, is that the prop itself would be the first thing to fragment, and therefore save the internal components of the engine, which I believe the ground crews preferred that, because if an aircraft ever belly landed or damaged a prop on landing, they'd still be able to save the engine.
Well, yeah, they could just change the props as opposed to changing the engine.
Yeah.
But you would think that wooden propeller blades would indicate an earlier aircraft, but it's actually the other way around. They were metal blades, and then they, of course, realised that if a prop stuck in or whatever, the shock load to the engine would probably completely write that engine off, whereas if you had blades that would splinter, the engine is saved.
Yes.
And also, I should imagine that it saved an awful lot of, you know, materials as well.
Yes.
You know, as we know, aluminium was becoming short. You know, there's a huge sort of war effort going on in the factories in trying to, you know, keep up with the amount of aircraft that were needed.
And of course, we'll touch on a few components of the engine when we have a look at the restored engine outside, but these saxophone exhausts, as they were commonly known, something to do with a reduction in flame, which is obviously visible from a night fighter.
Yeah, because if you're running a Merlin at night, there's tremendous flames that come out of it that you can't see in the daylight, but at night time you can see them, and of course it's a bit like a beacon in the sky to any night fighters.
Yes.
So they had to try and suppress that flame, and this is one of the ways that they tried to do it, by basically kind of housing the flame inside this shape and trying to sort of disperse the flame before it exited the exhaust system. And as you say, you know, called a saxophone exhaust for obvious reasons. If you turned it up on its end, it kind of looks a bit like a saxophone.
Yes.
I mean, we have actually run this engine at night before, and I'll tell you that, I mean, the exhausts were glowing orange. I mean, it was kind of scary because I'd never seen it before.
Yes.
Totally normal, but, you know, even with those dampers on, they were still pretty evident.
Yeah.
And that was a problem that, you know, is basically trying not to be seen at night, and what with searchlights and night fighters and radar.
Yes. Testament, though, to the materials that were developed even back then, because I've got a very small piece of the stub which is extremely heavy.
Yeah.
It's almost titanium. Well, I mean, just the type of material to withstand the heat, because they used asbestos covers in the earlier models to reduce the flame. But moved on to these because I think the asbestos were huge and massively heavy as well. But something that we can look at a little bit later on when we have
absolutely, yeah. Well, you'll see the job that's been done on them, and it was actually a blacksmith that did that work, a local man. He doesn't want to be named for the reason that he doesn't ever want to do any more again.
Yes, yeah.
But basically,
I bet it was a task.
He couldn't. He said the metal was just so tough and so strong bearing in mind he had to cut these things apart
And heat them as well, I
and
guess.
heat them in a furnace,
Yeah, yeah.
get them glowing hot,
Yeah.
and then rapidly work them into the right shape again.
Yes, yeah.
And then weld them all back together again. You know, and again, it's an example of the efforts that we went to ensure the originality.
Yes.
You know, because, you know, a lot of people would say, well, why don't you just find some exhausts that are in better condition that are perhaps out at sea or something like that? But they're not JD 150.
No, exactly. You want to keep it as original as possible. So that's the bomber section. Obviously, a lot of individual sort of like artifacts and displays that you've got on here, and we can have a little walk around. Gilly, do you want to call me on the ops phone, on the comms phone now, if you like? I'm ready to take that call if you can hear me. So just a little brief walk around. What else you've got?
Yeah,
here,
because
Dan?
we could be here all day.
We could talk all day for sure.
Yeah. Well, this is the kind of the Blitz and the Battle of Britain section.
Yes.
So we got here a parachute that was recovered from a tree near Outwood from a crashed German ME-110, and then an example of a German parachute that's been turned into a wedding dress.
Yes.
And the details of the happy couple that were married for 50 years. So, you know, I think that's the important thing about the museum is it's about people. You know, it's the people behind these things, the people that made it happen.
Yes.
Machines and bits of metal are obviously important tools, but, you know, it's the human side of things that's this kind of interesting thing, really.
So a lot of German fighter stuff here. 110 there.
Yeah, and this looks like a table, but it's actually a Morrison shelter, so it was a kind of a steel strengthened cage that would be used as a table. And if you didn't have a back garden for an Anderson shelter, you would probably have one of these if you were in an area that was at risk of being bombed.
Yes.
And when the siren sounded, you would climb inside and you'd be expected to spend the night in there all through the air raids. And I'm not exactly sure how I'd sleep in there, I have to say. I mean, I'm probably a bit too fussy, but I guess you had to do what you had to do. And, you know, and then having been through the air raids, these people are probably getting up early the next morning and going on essential war work, having perhaps not had much sleep.
Exactly.
Not much food.
So again,
and, you know,
more commitment.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
This is by the looks of it, from barrage balloon. Is that a barrage balloon?
Yeah, we believe it's the only. We actually had a barrage balloon society come round who were quite excited by it because the length of the cable denotes that it is one that went on a barge and probably most likely in the Thames.
So when you say the length of the cable being quite short, is
Being quite short, yeah. So basically they had barges in the Thames with barrage balloons to stop the Germans coming up the Thames and mine laying. So we think it's one of those, and we believe it's the only one in existence, or certainly known about. And it was retained by a builder in Sussex, and he used to somehow, I think, get bricks up to a or roof tiles up to a roof. You know,
that's the back end of a Lancaster bomber, isn't it? Or,
yeah, and again, that's one that was shot down in Belgium. We'd desperately love to find the tail turret to go in there just to kind of complete it, but.
Yeah.
Again, unrestored. You know, you can see a bullet hole on the side there. It's unrestored because, again, it has the story behind it. And, you know, if you kind of restore that and make it look factory fresh, it's not that thing anymore, is it really?
Like all this stuff that you've got here. This is, by the looks of it, recovered from the sea? Or?
Yeah, no, it's quite popular, this. Again, as a kid, I was always fascinated with what lurked in the deep. And this is all things that have been come out the sea and in fishing nets and washed up on beaches. And, of course, you know, there's just literally tons of it out there. The tyre there is from a Wellington that we actually recovered from a beach down in Sussex. And the big red arrow there is actually pointing to a cannon hole that's gone through it. All the crew, they ditched quite close to the beach. All the crew got out, luckily. But they recovered most of the aircraft, but obviously components of it were sort of buried in the sand, and that washed up. But when we were recovering it, we had 4 scaffolding bars, and they were bent in half trying to lever that out of the sand. I mean, it was incredible. But so we had to go back and try again, but there it is. It's, again, story behind it.
Yes,
and that's what's important.
I mean, that is the crazy thing, isn't it? Every single component or every single piece or artifact that you have here has a story behind it. Somebody handled it, you know. Everything has a story. Just incredible. More stuff here. Air raid stuff.
Yeah. Well, that bomb is a German 500 kilogram SD bomb. And that was found, I was going to read the label, but it's found in 2017. It feels like only last year. But that was actually recovered from a building site at Broadbridge Heath, very local to the museum. And it was totally inert. It had been buried as a bomb disposal training area. So they would actually bury these things like 25 feet in the ground. And then it would be a recruit's job to hand dig down to them and using shuttering. And then practice defusing it or practice trepanning it, which is where they drill a hole in the casing and steam the explosive out. But they're all bombs that were dropped in the Blitz, so you can see the scrape marks on the paint of where it's gone in the ground.
Yeah.
They just basically, any that were defused in the Blitz were used as training aids at that time. I mean, you can see there's, some of the cabinets are devoted to one person. So if there's a lot of items relating to one particular person, then it will be dedicated to them.
Yes.
We got Land Army girls around the corner there, Home Guard. Everybody who did their bit basically kind of deserves a place in the museum.
Okay, we'll take a walk around just a little bit further round. So much to explore here. I mean, you could spend literally a day here. Even got a searchlight.
Yeah, we got a few people gathering out. Is it all right to...
So we just have one quick...
If we go down to the workshop...
Yes, they're okay to come in now. So we're going to start letting the people in. We can...
leave the sounds for the moment, but...
Gilly, are you there? Can you call me on the comms if you've got a feed for that? I'm sure. Okay, Dan, so just tell us a little bit about this Dora we've got going on here.
Okay, well... Dora is touching on the Holocaust, which is basically the forced labour that was used to construct the V weapons.
Yes. And that is the engine from one of the V weapons, is that right?
It is, yeah. It's recovered from a site in Essex. If anybody recognises it, I mean, at one time someone would have known where it was, but, unfortunately that history was lost. But all we know is it come from a forest in Essex, but... we'd love the story behind it, but
okay.
The sort of
this is quite interesting, isn't it?
It's one of the stars of the museum, really, because it's actually an aircraft that visitors can go inside, and even wheelchairs can access this aircraft. And of course, it's a Douglas Dakota or a Skytrain, as the Americans called it. But this one, it served in 1943 with the Americans, but we also. It starred in Band of Brothers, so we normally played a clip inside of the Band of Brothers that was filmed, but there are some sort of modifications to it that the film companies did.
Yes.
So do you want to
let's have
take a little wander in there?
So like you say, fully accessible for wheelchairs, and you can have a look in it, and of course there we go, hold on a second, this is what I've been looking for. Hello? Hello? Everything all right? So Dan, we've got the flight deck, obviously, covered off, but the radio operator station or navigator?
Yeah, that's a navigator, Radio op is just up the front on the right. The cockpit is still pretty original to how it would have been in World War II. There's a few little minor details that are sort of post-war, but obviously the Dakota or the Skytrain it's still in service, I believe, in some parts of the world.
Yes.
But quite a fantastic aircraft that retained a use for years and decades after, its original purpose, really. And served in every theatre of World War II as well, so it's pretty much relevant to everything, really.
D-Day with the parachutists.
Yeah, and it returned the wounded after D-Day and the invasions with the Flying Nightingales.
Yes, Yes, and was it involved with Operation Manor as well, perhaps, or was that mainly Lancasters?
I think they were mainly Lancs and also C-54s because they were bigger.
Yes.
But I think there were some Dakotas, but not so many. But
Yeah.
they did also play a big part in returning prisoners of war.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. Repatriation.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's.
There are lots of stories of them, you know, having been in captivity for 4 years, getting out of these things and kissing the ground. You know that they're finally home.
Yeah.
They finally made it. They're alive. You know. So yeah, this is.
And the majority of them were, or a high percentage of them were downed aircrew who had gone to concentration camps or just to camps in general, prisoner of war camps, not so much concentration camps, but POWs that were
still a tough existence. But when you think that those that were taken prisoner in Dunkirk, how many years they had to spend in captivity and, you know, just being behind a fence, the same thing day in and day out. I mean, you know, often a lot of them would try and they'd put on a stage show for their fellow campmates, and often the Germans would actually encourage that because it kept them occupied.
Yes.
And if they're occupied, they're less likely to be thinking about escaping. You know, but that was the other popular, the popular kind of, not sport, but perhaps again it's a way of doing your duty.
I did hear a story once of a group of German POWs who were sent out to plant the flowers on the seafront in Hastings or wherever it was, and by the time they'd left, the bulbs had come up, and they'd written "F off England" or something like that, which was really quite funny when you think about it, because they knew that it was going to happen there. But anyway, we let's have a little look. More recovered items, just so much for people to see. And again, everything with a story behind it.
That's it, yeah, loads of it. There's a P-38 Lightning there that was excavated down in Swindon, and the photograph of the pilot there who bailed out of this one, but he was killed some months later. That's the thing, you know, if they survived one incident, of course, their duty wasn't done. They had to go on until their missions were flown. But if we go through these doors, which we obviously got for members of the public and veterans beginning to arrive.
Yeah, that's fine.
So we'll go into the workshop. So we do have quite an active restoration side of the museum as well, which we open up to the public and give them guided tours now and then, but generally it's sort of closed off at the moment. But the future idea is to have a viewing area. But this is a Bell P-63 King Cobra, American built. Now, we've restored the cockpit, and I'll show you, maybe if you just point the camera at that, that is actually the production line at Bell. So these aircraft, they were manufactured as you see them. One of the few aircraft where the cockpit section was a separate entity. So that attracted us because we could restore the cockpit and we could put it on an aircraft later on.
So you've even recreated the stand, the actual stand that it was, the type of stand that it was.
Yes, yep.
The same as what you've got there.
Yeah, we've done a sort of a replica to display it on, really.
Yes.
That's a crashed door from Russia. That's from a P-39, but the doors are the same. But again, you can see how we've kind of taken this apart to recreate doors, because we haven't been able to find any, but these are the doors that we're in the process of fabricating. So
have you created those from your own materials and fabricated them yourselves as well?
Yeah, and well, not me personally, but Tony is primarily behind the P-63, and
that's so impressive.
Yeah, well, we wish we had more Tonys, because he's kind of the guy that can just find a solution to anything.
Yes.
And that's what you need, because these aircraft were built in mass manufacturing, you know.
Yes.
If you go around the other side, you can stick the camera through the doorway and show people. Wow. So pretty much the cockpit is completely done. It's to be fitted up, but it's really awaiting now a centre section to fit it on.
Yes.
The Americans weren't that keen on the Aero Cobra or the King Cobra because it had, the unique thing was that it had the engine behind the pilot, and this big metal bar here,
Yeah.
which I'll let you get a shot of.
Wow.
That
It's
was
a big metal bar, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's important because that actually went between the pilot's legs and carried the propeller shaft from the engine to the propeller at the front. And that's the reason why the Americans didn't like it. They felt that it was all wrong. And I guess having that between your legs with some massive propeller blades, it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable.
And
It's certainly
it went
if you're
out
a
of
man
balance
anyway.
as well, and,
Yeah.
and dislodged
Yeah.
itself. Or yeah.
Now, the advantage of the P-63, this is the reason why the Russians loved it, is that in this little container here, it had 50 calibers as well. I've got to try and do this without dropping the mic, but that is what it fired through the nose. So
That's some ordnance.
that is a 37mm cannon, and it fired centrally through the nose. So basically, where you pointed your aircraft is where
Yes.
this round would hit.
Yes.
And if they were to fire off too many of these, they could actually even stall the aircraft because of the recoil. But that was the advantage of having the engine behind the pilot.
Yes.
You could stack the front with guns and ammunition.
Incredible.
Now, this is actually a combat veteran that served in the Kuril Islands, and it invaded some of the islands over there that were held by the Japanese. So it provided air cover and ground support. It was a brief war. It went on for about only 6 weeks, but it continued beyond the Japanese surrender because the Russians were winning, they were taking land, and there was no one there to stop it going on. So even though the official surrender documents had been signed by the Japanese, they carried on. They eventually stopped. Now, just to kind of bring this into the kind of touch into the modern world, that this aircraft, the Russians, continued using it after the war. In actual fact, once World War II was over, the Americans were then a little bit concerned because obviously their border went into Alaska and into these islands. The Russians are very close to their border, so the tensions were beginning to mount with the Berlin airlift and such like, and there was a big tension there, so they sent over a reconnaissance flight to photograph the Russian positions to know where their front lines were, and they were intercepted by a flight of P-63 King Cobras, so they were intercepted by their own aircraft, and that flight turned around. They didn't get their photos because obviously that it's carrying that formidable weapon in it.
Yes.
So they turned around. That was the beginning of the Cold War, and I believe, again, I'm relying on my memory here, but I believe it had the code name, a NATO word of a franc, I think it was called. But they were used into about early 1950s, and then as part of the Lend-Lease, as we understand it, the Russians had to pay the Americans back for anything that they received in World War II, but I believe there was a loophole in that you didn't have to pay for things that were destroyed. So the Russians basically destroyed everything they had. They broke the wings apart, they put axes through them, they cut the cables.
Really, just so that they didn't have to pay it back.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
In the 80s, when the satellites were going over photographing all these airfields, the Russians also wanted them to be seen that they weren't operational aircraft. They'd been abandoned at this point.
Yes.
Now, I'll just wander through. We've just recently started restoring one of the centre sections that the cockpit mounts on.
Ah, okay.
So we've moved on from the cockpit now into this is the centre section deck. So basically, this is where the cannon would be, the engine in the back. Actually, the engine...
Probably one of the only aircraft
that's actually
had a rear-mounted engine.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other aircraft that had a rear-mounted engine.
It was a Bell.
Fighter, should I say.
It was a Bell Belief, and when you think that they've now obviously moved into helicopters, it's almost a helicopter concept in a normal configuration aircraft. And later on, they upturned it, and it's worked very well. But it was a unique aircraft, and the Russians loved it. It was an excellent.
V12?
Yeah, an Allison.
Yeah.
V12. that's the original one out of this aircraft. But you know, when you sort of think that it served the purpose of what was going on in that theatre, what it was designed to do was to escort fighters to Berlin in the European theatre, but it never had enough range. It could never carry enough fuel.
Right.
So
okay.
it never really got there.
Yes.
But it instantly fulfilled the demand that the Russians were putting on, that they needed an aircraft that was ground attack. So it fulfilled that role.
Yes.
And they, well, I mean, some of them are retained in the States, but the Americans never used the P-63 in anger.
Yes. So you've got a pretty extensive workshop here, quite a lot of equipment to do all the jobs that you need. I can see you've got is that the machine where you clean?
Yeah, that's the blaster, but we got an English wheel here as well, folders, guillotines, milling machine, lathe, spot welder, you know, you name it really. Again, the workshop desperately needs more space. We have too many projects going on in such a small area.
Yes.
You know, and that's why it's in a little bit of a mess today. We are kind of having a little bit of a clear up, but we've got on days we've got like 15 volunteers working in here. So you can imagine, you know, it's not ideal, but I think people understand that, you know, you work with what you got, maybe in that wartime spirit almost.
Yes.
You know.
And I guess for volunteers who would normally, you know, they're retired, most of them, I guess,
yes.
And they're, you know, otherwise just sitting at home listening to Popmaster and watching daytime TV, rather be here working with amongst friends and restoring aircraft back to, you know, a displayable.
But they're from all walks of life, because the guy that's actually done this is a Jet Provost.
Yeah.
Slightly out of our era at the moment, but we're doing it so that kids can sit in it. It's a dual seat aircraft, so you don't get the kids arguing who's going first.
Yeah.
But basically, pretty much a lot of the work, certainly the internal work, has been carried out by a retired GP. And he'd never done any practical work in his life, but he seemed to love this. He seemed to have it in his blood. Because some people, it's there, you know, they're good with their hands.
Yes, yes.
So he's done a lot of this and he's loved it, you know, doing something completely different from what he's done all his life. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So, we've got items everywhere.
Yes, yeah. Hoists and...
we need those quite often.
Yeah, I bet. For lifting items like that, for example. Yeah.
That's another Allison engine. We've actually... in various conditions, we've actually got 6 of them, so that's another reason why we sort of restored one of them. But you know, the most complete one is sort of preserved in the museum. Yes. As a reminder to, you know, as to how it was.
Should we have a little look around the final section? There's still so much more here. I mean, this looks like one aircraft, is it?
Yes, that's another Lightning, P-38 Lightning that was reconnaissance, so it was blue. So I should imagine if you look at those colours, which are all original as recovered, that would have been quite an attractive aircraft to see in the skies.
Yes, yes, most definitely.
We've got a pair of engines here.
This is really impressive. A lot of people don't. So many people aren't aware of this because there weren't many of these built, were there?
No, not at all. This is an HE-177, or a Griff as the Germans called it, but it was basically 2 Daimler-Benz 605 engines coupled together with a common reduction gear to connect them. That then become the Daimler-Benz 610, and it had this massive propeller unit through it. And again, these were recovered from an area near Normandy, and the aircraft was on its way out with glide bombs. So they were actually primitive radio-controlled bombs that they could actually launch and control to the target. And they were going out to attack Allied shipping, but they were intercepted by a Mosquito, and they were shot down. All the crew bailed out, but basically the bombs were still on board when this thing went in the ground, and the Mosquito was buffeted violently at 6,000 feet from the explosion.
Wow.
So, and again, another tragic twist of fate was that the Mosquito was damaged in this attack, and he had to force land on one of the beaches. And apparently the records show that as he was forced landing, the aircraft skidded into a truck and killed the driver. So, you know, you could literally be minding your own business, surviving combat, to finish your days like that.
Yeah.
You know.
Crazy. Absolutely.
So,
crazy.
yeah, very unique. Probably
Yes.
the only place, certainly in England, where you can see such an exhibit.
Yeah, yeah.
There's the undercarriage
Just
leg there.
Such an impressive. That is massive, isn't it? I bet they had. Did they not have possible overheating issues with these engines, or?
Yeah, I think the main issues was that they had to prime them so much to get them going that they often caught fire.
Yes.
So I don't think they were that popular, you know,
No.
with the ground crews and the air crews.
So here another. Japanese aircraft. This one.
Yeah, this is one of the Japanese aircraft that was recovered from the Kuril Islands. This is a Nakajima B5N2 Kate, or the code name was the Kate, and it had a crew of 3. And up until fairly recently, it was the only one in the world, but the Pearl Harbor Museum have subsequently got the remains of one. So it's a very rare aircraft. And this sort of represents friend and foe, because I was talking about the P-63 behind us, the one which we've preserved as is in the museum. So these were in the same war, and that's sort of how we display them. That here we have the Japanese element, which was recovered from just literally as found, really. And then the P-63 over the other side, which is the...
Oh, that's another. So that's a rear-mounted engine as well.
Yeah, that shows you the cockpit section that we've restored, the centre section that I showed you earlier in the workshop, and the engine behind the pilot.
And you can see where the cannon is mounted through the shaft there, is that
That's
right?
it, yeah. Which is something that the Germans were quite fond of, and makes perfect sense, really.
Yes. Was the 109, did the 109 not have a cannon that went through the hub?
Yeah.
So impressive to think that technology those days, just to be able to create that capability.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things with war, I think, is that technology advances massively.
Yes, and it has to.
Yeah.
You have to, don't you?
Well, you have to be better than the enemy. So
Yes.
therefore, you know, certainly a lot of the aircraft that we see in the skies today, they would probably have not been quite as advanced if these conflicts hadn't happened.
Yes, yes.
You know, because obviously these become the foundation stones for the new era, you know, like the
Yes.
Meteor and the jets.
Absolutely, yeah, which a lot of people are unfamiliar with the fact that even before the war ended, the jet engine was being developed.
Yes.
And
it was
the
used in
Germans,
combat.
The 262.
Yeah,
yeah, it's incredible. Dan, I know you're
Yes.
stuck for time, so should we just quickly go outside?
Yeah, should we see what veterans are arriving?
Yeah, see what veterans are arriving.
And I'll...
have a quick look around the actual Merlin that we're going to be firing up a little bit later, and then I can let you get on with your.
Yep, sure.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're out here now with the engine.
And there it is. Wow.
So
impressive, Dan.
we saw the examples earlier,
Yes.
and I pointed out the state of the exhaust.
Yep. And he has done a fantastic job, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. He's performed a miracle there, I think. And of course, that is what gives it the unique sound, and it is a sound that's quite a bit different from an engine that's in a Lanc or a Spitfire, or
Yes.
but even the engine bearer is original.
Yes, that is really impressive. I mean, the engine bearers being these components here, which, when you think about the fact that the aircraft went in, not deep.
No,
It's
at a
sort
slight
of
angle.
Yeah. It's still impressive testament to the to the strength and durability
Yeah, I mean,
of the bearers.
even the propeller hub, this component here, is the original. So you can see that, you know, there is evidence of the fact that it has been recovered and dug up, but,
Yes.
you know, it's safe, so it's been reused. And, you know, where there was damage that didn't need to be repaired, we've just left it. Like the ignition harness here, just there. Yeah, that is damage that was occurred in the crash, and we've just opted to kind of leave it exactly as that. You know, it's all part of the story.
Massive supercharger, of course, which was a big part of the Merlin. There's your carburation behind there, carburetor. And one thing I did notice, Dan, you've built this the starter panel here, the control panel, which is absolutely fantastic, using all authentic parts.
Yeah, again, that was Peter Grieve at Flight International up in Leeds, and he specialises in building these trailers. So, and he likes to use the original instruments, so they are all wartime configuration. So, apart from a control yoke, we got everything we need.
Yeah. So how much fuel do you burn on an average starter?
It'll probably burn about 30 quid's worth of 97 octane is what we use. And you can see, you know, she's got a few oil leaks.
Yeah.
It's to be expected, you know. I mean, they leaked in service.
Yeah.
They called it marking their territory.
Yeah, there was always 4 marks at the dispersal, wasn't there?
Yeah. Well, that's why, you know, like the Lancs had the tyre covers to stop the oil leaking onto the tyre.
Yes.
You know, which would obviously then affect its performance.
Yeah.
So the only elements that are not original is literally the radiator, the coolant tank, and the propeller blades, because obviously they're metal.
Yes.
They're actually off of a Firefly.
I see.
They are the only blades that we could find that would fit that particular hub.
And this glycol tank is off a
Shackleton, I believe.
Shackleton,
yeah,
right.
so off of a Griffin engine.
Yeah, because people knowledgeable about the Merlin engine will know that the glycol tank literally wrapped around that assembly there. But other than that, it's just absolutely fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think when you sort of hear the ages and the names of the crew, and then you hear that sound, and you know, you appreciate that it's that engine.
Yes.
That is what those guys looked out on their wing
Yeah.
and possibly saw on fire, or, you know, that is what they were hoping was going to get them home.
Yeah.
The aircraft flew 14 missions. The crew were with it 3 times, and on their 3rd operation, they were obviously lost, killed in action.
So the other 12 missions that it flew.
We have got a log of them all.
Okay.
Yeah, with another crew.
Yes.
Yeah. It come back damaged by flak quite often.
Yeah. So that crew were given another aircraft, and the aircraft went in for
so
repair.
whether they completed their ops and
Yeah,
they inherited this aircraft. Yeah. Just one of those. I mean, like, you'll talk to the veterans later on, but yeah, when you talk to them, they don't necessarily see themselves doing anything any different than anyone else. They just literally, there is a certain amount of luck.
Yes.
You know, that you're either, I mean, these guys we know were coned in searchlights.
Yes.
Tragically, they wandered off the bomber stream. They drifted out, and the bomber stream was being protected by window or chaff strips of aluminium that were basically lobbed out of the aircraft.
Yeah.
To create massive readings
Confusion
for the radar.
Yeah.
But the crew of JD-150, and I dare say other aircraft as well, wandered out of that bomber stream, so they'd become an individual target.
Yeah.
So all emphasis was put on them. They were then coned by searchlights, and then rapidly intercepted by the night fighter. So, you know,
possibly even were attacked by, or were in the process of being attacked by a night fighter and were corkscrewing, and therefore lost their way from the stream.
Yeah. I mean, they're not here to tell their story,
no.
So we have to respect that. You know, let's face it, they did all they could.
Yeah.
They were young men that wanted to get home, so you know, it's that kind of reality, really, I suppose.
Well, Dan, thanks so much.
That's no problem.
Appreciate it. I think we're Julie. If you can try me on comms, I'll get that And Dan, I'll grab that mic off of you.
Yep.
I'll let you get on with what you have to get on with, and we will catch up with you in a little bit, mate.
No problem.
Hello. I don't know what's going on with the phone. That's is it? Okay, but we're all right. Everything's all right, is it? Okay. Okay. So what I can do is I can probably go for a fix out on this. Right. Okay. So just check you've still got comms there. You've still got mic. The mic's still there. The mic's still good. Okay. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I think maybe the best thing for me. No. Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, I'm hopeful that you enjoyed that. I know there's a lot of people who are not particularly interested in the Second World War or aviation linked to it, but for true history buffs, it's always interesting to hear the stories and okay, good. Oh, Tui? Is that so? Oh, really? Oh, okay. Well, he'll be there now. He should be okay. Yeah. Okay. So, as you can see, folks, what time have you got, Jilly? On your. Oh, why does that keep going bing like that? 10:27. So we're looking at around about 25 minutes. Does anybody? Is there anybody on the feed? Oh, that's very annoying that keeps happening. Is there anybody on the feed who perhaps wants me to go anywhere in particular inside the? I'm just wondering if I shouldn't get the sticks, Jilly. Lock it out, and then go and get the phone. Yeah, I'll go and get my other phone. So just stand by 1 second. Thanks, guys. Cheers. Okay. All right. Oh, did it? Okay. So as you can see, guys, people queuing up to go in here. I'm just wondering whether it's worth. Let me just wander in here. Excuse me. Excuse me, sorry. Oh, is it? Okay, on the bucket list. Okay, my sticks are... Where are my sticks now? Let's just have a little look, see where my sticks are. That's over there. Excuse me, can I just... Come on, darling. Sorry.
Sorry.
So we're just on the line up here. Okay, right. That's what we want, and I need to jump out. So I've got a couple of veterans here. I've seen them before. Right, what I need to do is I need to... Sorry, Matt.
Sorry.
What I'm going to do is... Yes. Hello.
Ian,
Hey, how you doing, Ian? Good to see you, mate. That's a coincidence you're here today. That's great to see you, mate. Oh, are you? Oh, okay.
I might have a...
Right. Okay. Sorry, folks. Now, I'm going to be... Just gonna go and get the other phone. Got 3 ports running. So yeah, but that's actually I've got it here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to.
Okay. Take some close-ups. Okay.
Right. Okay, we're back in the land of living. People are asking anything in particular they want me to focus in on the museum. Did somebody say the shelter? No, I'm not gonna. Well, there are two different types of shelter here. No, it's not over. Okay, can you? I just want to check the audio, Julie. You just. Let me just grab it. I'm just going to quickly grab this. Leave that. One second. Well, a lot of people obviously here having their
just a bit of a chat with me and then
what you got?
I'll let you do it, Mike.
There's a lot of artwork being signed. Now, okay. So let's just have a little look here. So now these gentlemen here, folks, obviously.
interesting history, mostly not UG, but also and you said you competed yourself quite a lot? Only really probably in the last 2 or 3 years. First time I've been here. Because I've got a couple of prints.
I was going to say, sorry George, you've signed these books as well, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much. See the signatures I remember coming and meeting them.
So these guys obviously quite busy with people signing their books. They obviously have. Thank you. Okay, we'll leave those guys to it. Okay, is this the shelter that obviously in a lot of the gardens in the south of England during the Blitz, London, obviously quickly quickly put up, and of course, just in the background you can hear the doodlebug, which was the flying bomb. The distinctive noise of the doodlebug. I don't know if we can pick that up in here. You know, as many home comforts as they could muster up. Sometimes caught out in the middle of the night. Other times, you know, spent the whole night in there. I believe that's part of the tailpipe, the tail section of a doodlebug, possibly maybe shot down, because the Spitfire and the Hurricane and the Tempest, I believe, was used quite extensively. In fact, there's a Tempest there being used, or is it the Typhoon? I'm not sure, one of the two, used extensively to tip the doodlebug off course, sending its gyroscope off course and putting it into the ground before it managed to reach its target. Okay, more artifacts. Just if anybody wants me to look at anything, Jilly, just make sure if they want me to focus in on anything, keep me posted on that. Yeah, this is all Spitfire related artifacts. Control column. Firing pin. Throttle. More recovered Spitfire artifacts. That's something that that is found around airfields and around the old control towers and so on and so forth, just to show, just to even bring a little bit more sort of like realism into it, you know. The fact that you know, these guys would bring stuff in whilst they're at work in the hub body, propeller hub, that is. See again the wooden prop. Air raid siren, look at that. And all that from RAF Tangmere. So we've had a look around here. So as you can imagine, the majority of artifacts that were found, that's part of the windshield there. Look, that's the windshield from this Hurricane. See how thick the glass is, obviously, to withstand a fighter attack as best it could. But the majority of artifacts that were recovered, that have been recovered, are obviously fragmented. As you can see there, engine parts. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Paul Maskell asking about ejection seats. Well, obviously, the ejection seat was something that was brought on a lot later in the war. I don't think there were any prop aircraft that were fitted with ejector seats. I think it was just the early jet fighter variants. Something that we saw earlier on. Paul, actually, I think we can, if we have a little wander down, we will actually be able to see go into the workshops and have a little look. And I'll show you an early type of ejection seat, which is, as Dan pointed out to us a little bit earlier on, that this particular restoration project, even though it's not from the Second World War, I believe these were an early form of ejector seat. As you can see here, that stall actually deep in here. I believe this is an ejector seat. Seeing the sliding segment of it was obviously, you know. Let's just have a little look round here. Ah, yes, you can see the tube. You can see the tube there. What's this? What the hell? What happened there? Are you there, Julie? All of a sudden, I'm talking to Adobe. What on earth's that all about? Oh, that's the phone, isn't it? It's the phone. But there you can see the tube, that the literally quite primitive, actually, type of ejection seat, where the and I'd imagine this is where the chute would have been stowed for the ejector seat, and it literally, I think that's your handle that you pull, and then boom, out you go. You see a little bit of the so I think that's I think that kind of gives you an idea of the ejector seat. Okay. Okay. I think that's kind of like explains that. Oh, my nap. So look at all these artifacts from the beaches, basically. See what you can find when you go down the beach and have a real good look, because of course, especially a lot of these places are recovered from the beaches at Normandy. Still stuff being washed up and exposed on those beaches. Like for instance, this here, look. This is from Utah Beach in Normandy. Some of this, some of these artifacts, which is highly impressive. As you can see, more stuff from the beaches at Normandy. And again, you know, every single artifact that you see here will have a story attached to it. Whether that rifle, whether the guy who was holding that managed to survive or not, we do not know. That's quite interesting. Look at that. A Nazi door recovered from Chateau de la Hazière at Vaux-sur-Aure. This door was found when a sealed up room was opened during the sale of Chateau de la Hazière in Bayeux in France. The symbol is the German V victory symbol, stenciled on buildings by the victorious Germans on the fall of France in 1940. Well, that didn't last very long, did it? So, excuse me, more artifacts. P-38 Lightning. See how crumpled that radiator is. Look at that. That's all from impact. It just goes to show the force of impact when these things went into the ground, and it was whether or not it went into boggy ground or into hard ground. Obviously, when it went into hard ground, it just fragmented. That's part of the compass. Pilot's control yoke from Lucky P38 Lightning. Caught fire over Swindon on the 5th of February 44 and crashed at Elcombe near Swindon. Pilot Waldron was instantly killed in the crash. He was taking 326 on a high altitude test hop over Oxfordshire. So as you can see, this guy may well have been a veteran pilot. A lot of the pilots who completed their missions would either go on to fight more combat missions, or sometimes went to heavy conversion units or training units, became ferry pilots or trainers, and of course a lot of those guys getting lost as well, losing their lives during those missions as well. So you can see the damage to the prop, which, to be perfectly honest with you, when you look at these props, they're alloy props, but not as badly damaged as you would expect when that comes down. So that possibly came down in water. I don't know the story of this. Is this all the one from Swindon? F5B. That's what you expect to see with a bent prop on impact. Again, you can see that's possibly a part of a radio set in there, but see how compacted it is from the impact. And that obviously the engine completely fragmented on impact there. See the pistons in there. So like cross section. The rockers. And again, you can generally see sometimes the direction that these things went in by the sorry guys, just making a bit of adjustment here. You can see the direction that these things went in by the way that the exhaust stubs are folded backwards, so that's obviously you'd be able to find the front of the engine. This is a Juno engine. I think the Juno engine was the JU88 power plant, another massive German engine. More or less the same, sort of like slightly larger than the Rolls-Royce variant of the V12. Used extensively in the during the Blitz, Battle of Britain. It's the oil sump cover, I believe, on the back wall there. Again, this huge Griffin engine. Twin engines connected by a central hub. Drive shaft there. And the hub there. Massive propeller hub. Four-bladed. This is quite interesting. B-25 recovered from Russia. And this a radial engine, obviously as you can see, totally different. oil air-cooled radial engine, different than the. Oh, that's fantastic! Clive Pardo's grandson enjoying himself, watching this. So this is the rear-mounted engine that we touched on earlier, which is crazy. It's the only rear-mounted engine variant that I can think of, unless anybody else is able to do that. But as you can see there, this is the Bell P63, and that's where the cannon fire would have come from. So quite easy in terms of target, finding your target and just shooting at literally what you're flying at. One of the engines. Again, another close-up look at that firing cannon, which is highly impressive. Front undercarriage. See, right the way back to there, though, you've got little displays going on over there. I think early jet engine right here. The Derwent Mark 60, fitted on the Gloucester Meteor, as you can see there. Very primitive jet engine. And have a little look inside this Dakota, if you like. Crew hatch. Of course, what we are, as we walk up through here, used in the Band of Brothers, this particular aircraft. So this is the door where the parachutists would jump from. All authentic, original. I believe this is where they would jump from. We've got a little. So this is this aircraft, inside this aircraft right there. Yeah, pretty intense. Yeah, that's pretty intense. Navigate this position. Look at the flight deck. Radio up. Okay. And we're out. Okay. Dan's a busy boy today. Still there, Jelly? I mean, that just that one single artefact alone, recovered from the crash site of Herbert Blockberger's Messerschmitt Bf 109, shot down on the 24th of June 1944 whilst on reconnaissance mission over Le Havre. Obviously, at that point in time, I'd imagine reconnaissance over the beaches and the even more there. Best fighters that the Germans had, as well as that the 190. Morse code? Yeah, there was Morse code. There was Morse code going on in the radiator.
Sound again, and what makes it unique is that the engine
This is an impressive restoration project, which, like I said earlier on, the Douglas Invader, which I saw here when way back in the day when I used to come here quite a lot. The interior has just been restored. Brilliant. Okay, so Link's trainer, made by Link, a gentleman by the name of Link. Let me just move this mic around a little bit. Hold on a minute. Okay, there we go. So, made by a gentleman called Link. Very early form of flight simulator. Now, I believe that after the war, when the mail service crews were used to fly decommissioned aircraft for carrying mail. A tremendous amount of the crews were lost, purely down to bad knowledge of flying, and so the Lynx trainer was brought back into commission and ordered extensively by the governments to train the pilots and reduce the amount of deaths. Pretty crazy. There's a few of these left, but once the doors closed, 1929, Edwin Link pioneered the development of safe and economical way of teaching pilots. So I believe it was initially it was poo-pooed by the government or governments, shall I say? Shall we go out and have another look? Oh, there's more of these. Busy boys. Now, these guys were air crew on Lancaster's, Halifax's. Some of them either navigators, bomb aimers, wireless operators, pilots. I don't think Mr. Bell's here today. Mr. Bell's a... look at this guy's searchlight. Dotted all over the UK, the southern part of the UK mainly, obviously. Flying boots. Later in the later boots for the crews had removable uppers, so that they could, if they were shot down, they wouldn't get recognised with their flying boots. Looked like just shoes. This is quite rare. No Hamdens in the UK. I think Hamden, the front end of a Hamden is actually being restored up at the Lynx Aviation Heritage Centre, which we went to recently. Just the front end of it, but this is the only, as far as I'm aware, the only recovered parts. This one particular Hamden P1273, and as you can see there, bullet hole from what looks like one of the flying controls. Vertical tail fin. Radial engine on the Hamden. Look how small that rear turret is, folks. Look how small that rear turret is. As you can see there, these guys loading it up on a Halifax Bomber. You can see how he swung the turret round. That would be one of the ways, the preferred way that a rear gunner would exit his aircraft if he was, if the aircraft was under attack, or if he was ordered to bail out, he would swing the turret round, obviously grabbing his parachute first, open the doors and fall out backwards, and hopefully make it down. This is all Halifax. This is one of the memorials that Dan was talking about earlier on. Get out of the light there. There we go there. So they would, they have created those these memorials and dedicated them to the crew that were lost. More hub. £1,000. There's a £500 there. A20. You can see the this is where the fuel tank, one of the fuel tanks, would be, folks. And that's the fuel tank would be sealed inside that casing, which is self-sealing, which means that if a bullet was to enter the fuel tank, it would seal itself. So that was something that was obviously developed during the war as well, to potentially extend the life, hopefully extend the life of the aircraft and also the crew allow it to get home if it was to come under attack. So this thing would have been just laying in a forest somewhere for many, many years before it was recovered. So going back here, now these are all fragments that I personally recovered with my sister, actually, over a period of 4 or so years. From these are all mainly components from a lot of components from the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine down there, which you can see there, the ignition harness, which we pointed out earlier on. So this is obviously, as you can see, fragmented, but each individual component I have identified, and even there, that fragment there, which is on the navigators, above the navigator, he had a little roller sort of with film on it, and that would a light would shine through that film and then project onto his navigation table to give him an indication as to his location, or perhaps to give him an idea of the target area, so to speak. And of course, this is what we were talking about earlier on. That's, I think that was for landing lights, perhaps. A couple of a dual switch landing light there. Perspex and other components. That's part of the self-sealing fuel tank that was recovered. And what is interesting is the technology. Sorry about that. That went into manufacturing. You know, even the prop blades had an outer coating which would strengthen them. That's part of the leading edge there of the prop blade as well. For ice to reduce ice or to like the hand crank for the prop, if you need for the crew, the ground crew, to hand crank the prop over. Operation book there. From Metheringham, went to the actual control tower at Metheringham one time. There's a Lancaster of the squadron there. Okay, let's move on out and go and have a good close look at this Merlin engine outside. Lots of people, obviously. See, Chili, what's the time now? Okay. So these are the rear doors from a Lancaster Bomber, folks. So you can see how small they are. So you'd slide them either side, and that is the only exit. It's an incendiary bomb, which they carry multiple amounts of over a bombing raid. Some of the bombs would be larger bombs, of 500 and 1,000 pounders would be used to literally blow the tiles off of the roof, and then the incendiaries, which are fire sticks more than anything else, they'd go in there, catch a light, and burn the property, which is a great shame. I don't like to talk about it because obviously during that time thousands of people lost their lives, and nasty times. Okay, so fully restored Lancaster panel. It's the blind panel, the six-pack blind panel, which was the most important thing that the pilot could use to indicate at a glance whether the aircraft's flying straight of course, his speed and altitude, everything that he needs there to just refer to that panel when he's in dangerous weather conditions, of course. Okay. Let's see if we can get a little. I don't want to disturb these guys too much. Hey Martin, how you doing, mate? I'm well, sir. You? Filming. Okay. So I think Kevin, which are you still there, Jilly? Okay. So we've got Kevin's Dan's brother Kevin out here, and we are. Looks like they are kind of getting ready. Hello, Kevin. How you doing, my friend? Good. Right. Okay, ladies and gents, this is Kevin, who's Dan's brother, involved extensively, obviously, in the restoration project of the engine.
Yeah.
So it is impressive how they put this together, isn't it?
Yeah. Fantastic.
Using 90%, I think, of the original engine.
Yeah. It's all stock 1943 configuration, basically.
Apart from the radiator, of course.
Yes.
And the glycol radiator.
Yeah, there's a few modifications.
Yeah, yeah.
And obviously the propeller blades on the Halifax would have been wooden originally.
Yes. And longer.
Yeah, and longer, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, these ones are actually sort of aluminium blades, and they're from a sea fire. So they have to be cut down, obviously, because we don't want it to take too much of a bite into the slipstream.
Yeah, of
and
course.
ground clearance as well.
What is interesting, and what people will notice when she does fire up, is how quiet she is compared to the normal exhaust, the stubbed exhaust of that we're used to when we were up at Lincolnshire.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, these saxophone exhausts, they were designed primarily for flame suppression when the bombers were operating.
I've heard that,
at night.
I must admit, but then again,
But they do also act as a bit
well,
of
if it's on a Mustang, it must be later engines as well.
That kind of
You know,
side advantage.
these
Yes.
But what you've got basically is the exhaust coming out into these exhaust ports here and collecting in this chamber. It's then sort of having a chance to cool down a little bit before it sort of then gets ejected out through the back part of the exhaust there.
And of course, it is the flame that they're trying to suppress.
Yeah, would you imagine at night time a bomber operating on pitch black to any night fighter, those flames coming out, 4 rows of exhausts, are going to stand out quite a long way on a clear night.
Yes, especially 8 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they don't need any, disadvantages like that.
Yeah, yeah. But so the carcass of the engine, the casing itself, is it managed to withstand, or have you? Was there extensive repairs done to that, or?
There were some repairs done, some minor sort of cracks and things that have been welded by specialists up in Leeds.
Oh yeah, you needed that.
There's very few people around who can do that kind of work.
Yes.
Luckily he can.
Yes.
So a lot of work in that respect is done by him.
Yeah.
It's all the original engine casing. The only thing that didn't survive was the engine sump, the oil sump at the bottom.
I see. Yes, of course it would. That would have.
The brunt of that sort of impact.
So where did you manage to source that from?
Well, this one was kindly donated by East Kirkby.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah.
So we are sort of indebted to them for that.
Yes, most definitely. Of course, I guess back in the day, the changing of the seals and so on and so forth on these sumps wouldn't have been a massive of massive importance to the ground crews, which is why we saw so much oil on the dispersals.
Yeah.
It would be more so the componentry, making sure the engines were working.
I think with these kind of engines, if you didn't get a bit of oil leakage, then there was a concern. More than having a concern that it is leaking.
Yes, yes. And what is interesting, I know we've touched on this earlier, is the framework.
Yeah.
The fact that that's all original.
The original frame from JD 150.
Yeah.
In 1943. Pretty unique, really.
Yeah, yeah. All the ignition harness, everything's
That's
all original.
Yeah. And even the prop hub, that's the original
Yeah,
prop hub.
yes.
So the blades aren't, but the prop hub is.
You're right on the audio, Julie. Do you want me to switch the mic? Okay, I've switched the mic round. Yeah, we can't hear you too well, Kevin.
Okay.
Okay, right. I've switched the mic round now, so you should.
Yeah,
get
well, I was just saying
slightly
that
better audio. Yeah, carry on, sir.
the prop hub's original. The blades are replacements, and as you said earlier, of course they've been sawn down. And originally the Halifax would have had variable pitch propellers. This would be variable pitch, but it's fixed in one position.
Yes.
Because it's almost fixed in a feathering position. It's taken a small bite, but not too much, because that'll give it the forward thrust, and we don't want that on a
Yes.
static engine.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh no, it's not for me. This chair's not for me.
So. So is the supercharger actually is it actually operational whilst you're firing it up? Is it actually
It's not really at this
not
kind
that
of...
maximum operating?
No.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind we have to restrict the RPM on this, because you can't put it up to full RPM, even though it's fairly rigid in the stand.
Yes.
You know, we can't put it to takeoff power.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we restrict it to about 2,000 RPM maximum. Most of the time we'll run it a bit less than that.
Yeah. And I can see that we're missing the starter. Is that where the starter would have been there?
That was, I think, the generator.
Oh, the generator,
Yeah.
right. Okay, okay. But you're using the starter, the original starter, are you?
We're using a starter, yeah. Yeah.
Most impressive. It is just incredible to think that thing flew, what, 15 missions, was it?
Yeah, yeah. And of course that night in 1943, when it kind of met that ace night fighter.
Yeah. So it may have been, like I was discussing with Dan earlier on, it may have been corkscrewing and...
More than likely.
Yeah,
That was
so that's
kind
why,
of
how they got out of the stream.
all pilots were trained, you know, that was kind of evasive manoeuvre, textbook evasive manoeuvre,
Yeah,
and they almost certainly would have tried that.
yeah. Could have even gone into a rudder stall, because this was a Mark II Halifax, was it?
It was, yeah. The
So it
Mark
would
II
have-
Halifax is the only one that had the Merlin engine. The other Marks of Halifax
Had
had
the
Bristol
Bristol
Hercules
Hercules,
radial
yeah.
engines.
Yes. So there's, and of course there were different types of rudder on the Mark II to the Mark III. Mark III had
kind
the
of
D
pointed
type.
leading edge.
Yeah.
I say pointed, it's not drastically pointed.
Yes,
but
it's more
as you say,
triangular than the other one.
The Mark III, for example, had a much straighter
Yes,
vertical rudder.
yes. And they were susceptible, I believe, to, for instance, the HR796. The word was that it went into a rudder stall.
Yeah.
But that in that instance, the crews were given a chance to get out.
Yeah.
You know, in this instance, there's a good possibility that, you know, the aircraft was shot up extensively, and
Yeah.
yeah,
And they may not even have, you know, had much warning,
yes,
because they were just developing, I think, the upward firing technique of getting underneath the bombers and
Shroud
firing
music,
upwards.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
it.
The ME-110s, wasn't it?
But
Yeah, great shame.
that was just coming into play when this was shot down. So
Yeah. And of course, a lot of the some of the German crews were sympathetic. They'd shoot the fuel tanks out,
yep.
let the bomber crews get out. You know, others would go straight for the bomb
Yeah.
bays. In which case, there'd be no chance.
No.
But the fact that this has gone straight down, it's
Yeah, when we can
In
more
some
or less
kind
be
of
sure
combat.
that, you know, they haven't shot the bomb load out.
yeah, yeah,
Some of the bomb load was still with the aircraft when it was found in Germany, and had to be defused. So the bomb load that did go up probably went up on impact rather than being
yes.
part of the shooting down process.
Yeah, that's fuel and oil. That's fuel, that's oil. Oh, and that's what nice.
Just have a little look down the other side. Shall we? How many times have you run it, Kevin?
I lose track.
You want to stay on this side just so I can get your audio, thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, you've run it quite a few times then, yeah?
Yes. Yeah, and then we had to do test runs and things. Make sure everything's working.
Yes, yes.
And also, we've been ironing out sort of small technical bits and pieces as we go along.
I guess you're sort of like wearing her in again, aren't you?
Yeah, first.
Is it the original pistons? And,
yes, it is.
Is it really?
Yeah. So the first couple of times we run it, we were getting quite a lot of oil and smoke coming back. And when you took the goggles off, you were sort of left with a clear ring where the goggles were, and the rest of your face was splattered with oil. But it's improved a lot as it's kind of like everything's bedding in again now.
Yes, of course.
And the more you run it, the more it kind of beds in.
Yes. It is incredible. You're using almost all the original internals as well.
Yeah.
Just
the internals
testament to Rolls-Royce, isn't it? Really.
It is, yeah. And they were quite well preserved because they still had the original oil inside the engine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that helps to, keep the corrosion at bay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well preserved because they were in a bog as well. I guess.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Yeah, I think that's that on the front of the hub. Is that a counterbalance? Is that some kind of a balance?
Yeah.
On the very front of the hub there.
Yeah. Well, we're not really using any of that kind of mechanism at the moment. But it is original to JD 150.
Yes. So we're not sure what's actually inside that.
Well, it has been apart, but I didn't take it apart.
Okay.
I'd say.
But all the feathering mechanisms and so on and so forth are actually inside the hub, aren't
technically, that could still work, but it's currently, as I said before, fixed because the last thing we want is to take a massive bite of air.
Yes.
And sort of the engine's then going to want to fly. It's going to want to move forward at least.
Of course it will. So I hope that answers your question, Adrian. And what's the normal starting procedure then, Kevin?
Well, just make sure fuel's on. We have to give a little prime of the oil to start with so that we know there's oil in the engine. Once the engine kicks in, its own pump will sort out keeping the oil circulating. Make sure we prime the engine and then a little bit of 1/4 inch of throttle. Then start both magnetos. And make sure that after it kicks in that the oil pressure is rising very quickly, and if the oil pressure gauge doesn't start rising, then we have to shut it down.
Oh really?
There's a problem.
Okay.
Because obviously if you haven't got oil pressure, then you've got a problem with oil circulation, and the engine could potentially seize quite quickly if you continue to run it.
Yes. Is that something that comes up pretty quick? The oil pressure. You've got an indicator on the panel, haven't you?
We have, yeah.
Okay, let's just have a little look at that. So again, this is something that was created by one of your crew. Is that right?
Yeah. So this is the oil pressure gauge, and as soon as the engine kicks in, we would expect that to start rising very quickly within a few seconds.
Yes.
If it doesn't rise, or if it doesn't get up to, say, 70 in about 10 or 20 seconds, then we would start to be a bit concerned.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what we'll find is that the pressure will rise quite a lot to begin with, and then as the engine warms up, and we've done a bit of 2,000 RPM for a while, and the oil kind of warms up and starts becoming thinner, if you like, then the pressure will start to drop again.
Yeah, obviously
it won't drop right down, but it'll stabilise.
I think we're getting a little bit too much interference with the other guy talking. Is that right, Billy? Or are we all right? Are we all right? Or I just a lot of people talking all at once. No, is it all right? Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, that's good then. That's good. Okay.
So the other thing that governs the length of time that we run this engine is the radiator temperature, because generally if it gets up to 100 I will shut it down, because the Merlins were renowned for, on the ground, overheating quite quickly.
Right, because they need forward motion.
Slipstream.
Yeah.
So, and obviously, although we've got a propeller, we've got a kind of reduced, diminished propeller.
Yes.
And we haven't got perhaps
no
quite
cooling.
as efficient system as it would have had in the aircraft. So, for safety of the engine's sake, if you like, when it gets to 100, we're generally shut it down.
Right.
So it doesn't overheat.
Yeah. But as it is at the moment, it's behaved itself.
Yes, yeah.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible, because I remember when these engines came in here, and I actually jet washed one of them myself, which was a pleasure to do.
Yeah, but you probably didn't think then that it would end up running.
No, just incredible. Such an impressive engine. And of course, what you could say is that the Merlin won the war, really. I mean, obviously not this variant of it, because there were more variants of it later on. I mean, I don't know whether it was the double X that was used in the Spitfire or...
It was used in the Spitfire. It was also used in the Lancaster as well.
Yes, of course, yeah.
So, you know, Rolls-Royce must have been... Yeah, that's right. Rolls-Royce must have been under tremendous pressure to get enough engines out to power all these different aircraft types.
Which is why they were made in Canada as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Looks like we might be getting towards the moment of truth, so to speak. Yeah. I believe you've got a one of the vets actually likes to fire it up.
Well, George Dunn, who was a Halifax pilot, we normally get him to press the start buttons. It's kind of poignant because it's kind of what he would have done in the aircraft.
Yeah, of course, yes. Is he Mark II or Mark III pilot?
I think he was actually Mark III.
Okay.
Check with him later. But
yeah. Even so, still the same start-up procedure.
Very similar.
Yeah.
Maybe not exactly the same.
Yeah. So you've got a fuel primer and a button there for the booster coil as well.
Yeah, we don't really use the booster coil so much.
Yeah.
We don't really need to.
You just use the throttle.
We use the fuel primer.
Right.
And then we'll use, obviously you've got a mixture control here and the throttle here. But we're not really doing much movement on the throttle because we can't push it to the gate, as it were. Which it would have been on takeoff power.
And magneto switches as well.
Yep. Exactly the same. Well, all of the instruments on there are kind of original instruments that would have been in the aircraft.
So what you're basically doing is you're simulating sort of like a ground run engine test.
Yeah, that's
up
it,
as far as you can go.
Yeah, using original instruments. Obviously, they're not out of this Halifax.
Yeah.
They're not even necessarily out of a Halifax,
Yes.
but they are original World War II instruments.
Yes.
Exactly the same as they would have been in the panel of JD 150. But for each radiator and oil pressure and boost gauge, there would have been four of them in a row.
Yes.
Obviously, for four engines.
Yes. And of course the flight engineer would have had a row of boost gauges as well as the pilot would have seen them as well.
That's right. I mean, the flight engineer would have done a lot of the engine management, well, all of the engine management during the flight, managing fuel. His responsibility was to switch between fuel tanks now and then so that you're using fuel equally from around the different tanks situated in the aircraft. So you don't want to use it all from one side, and then you'll end up kind of one side heavy. So they try to equalise, and they can also transfer fuel. Say, for example, they had a fuel tank that was punctured by shrapnel or a bullet or something like that.
Yes.
To a certain extent, they could transfer fuel from that tank into one of the other tanks.
Yes.
To try and save as much fuel as possible before it leaked out.
Yes. Yeah. And all that in sometimes in combat situations as well. Which is,
one thing we haven't got to worry about today is any kind of enemy activity, or even if the engine was to quit on us, we're not going down, are we? Just no.
We'll just shut the engine down and carry on with the other.
Find out what's happened and fix it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what time are we planning to?
1:30, so very soon.
1:30, so very soon. Yeah. So what I'd like to try and do, if I can, is sort of like stay on this side so I can see your start-up procedure.
Yeah, if you could make sure that you stay well back from the prop.
Yeah.
And just also bear in mind, it shouldn't happen, but if the prop was to pick a stone up, it could chuck it to one side.
Yes.
I think it's more likely to chuck it against the building there.
Yeah.
Just beware that it's
I'm going to be quite far over there because I can get a good zoom.
Yeah.
Probably going to be somewhere around about here, I'd imagine. Yeah.
And then afterwards, just bear in mind that the exhaust will be extremely
hot. Yeah. But
although we've
make
probably
a lot of ting-tong noises.
She will, yes.
Yeah.
Lots of those kind of noises, and you'll see kind of like heat shimmers coming from it.
Yeah.
But although we're only running it for about 4 minutes, they will get hot.
It's incredible to think that they went out on like 12-hour missions and,
Yeah.
at power as well,
Well, although those exhausts suppressed flame, I believe that under combat conditions they could still potentially get so hot that they glowed in the dark a bit.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it is the ultimate, I don't like to use the word boys' toy, but it is the ultimate, it's like having a historic car, isn't it?
Yeah.
And lovingly restoring that vehicle and then being able to run it.
Yeah, I mean, being able to sort of experience the sound, the smell,
Yes.
Even the bits, like you said, about the ting-ting from the exhaust when it shuts down.
Yes.
You can just imagine that after a 12-hour mission or whatever, and they finally arrived back at dispersal and shut the engines down, that noise must have been quite welcoming.
And eerie, because once the last aircraft shuts all its engines down, it's complete silence, isn't it?
Yeah.
A bomber base would be, just noise, just a cacophony of engine noise, and then nothing.
Yeah.
Just the early morning bird song, maybe, because they would arrive back early morning, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
on a lot of the race.
All go to a debriefing hut somewhere and have a coffee and a debrief.
Yes.
Before they were allowed to go to bed.
About 20 fags.
Probably,
by the time they even got there.
I'm not sure if they weren't offered a stiff drink as well.
Yeah. I think they did actually get. They were given a Todd of whiskey in their tea, weren't they?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And you can see from a lot of those. So that I've read a lot of books and seen a lot of images, and some of the images of crews that have just returned back off of a mission. It's just they look so tired.
Yeah.
And probably grateful that they've made it back.
Well, they weren't the most comfortable of places to sit for that long.
No.
Comfort was quite rudimental, really.
Yeah. Especially for the rear gunner, freezing conditions. I mean, even with a heated suit, just.
Yeah, and I don't know, how you could sit in one position like that for so long.
In such a cramped, confined space as well. Knowing that, you got a big target written on the back of you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or on the front of you, if you're the rear gunner. Okay, it looks like we are ready to rock and roll. Move this mic, Jilly, so I've got more of a... Okay, I'm going to let the guys get on. Jilly.
And where are they? One of the old boys has just gone to the toilets. So I'll just get me in.
Okay, so what we're waiting for now, folks, is the bomber crews to the bomber boys who are here today. It's just. What's that you just put in there then, Kevin?
This thing. This is an emergency kill switch.
Ah, right, okay.
So if I click that, everything will...
So that's when you see your radiator temperature going too high, or...
Well, I'll try and shut it down the conventional way, but this is kind of like an...
Okay, so that's that's a complete kill switch. Yeah, right, I see.
Everything dead.
Yes.
For safety reasons.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Put some oil in it.
Is that priming it?
Yeah, it gets the pressure, obviously, because it's a dry sump. You need to build the pressure up before you fire it, else you knock a big end out or something.
Yes.
You know? Let's take a bit of a while.
And all your batteries are in here, I guess.
Two batteries.
Oh, okay.
24 volt.
Here come the gents now. This is our...
Hello, George. Hello there, how are you? Nice to see you again. Hello, George. Yeah. All right. Hello, yeah. Yeah. Can't think of right.
Did I wear them before?
You did.
Yeah.
I think you did.
We don't need to put them on until we actually start. So we might get
But it's just a bit loud, that's all.
Yeah. So when we do the reading, is it before?
before, yeah.
Yeah.
So George will do a reading, basically.
They're assembling the George's
A
College.
short, brief history of JD 150 and the crew.
I think he's back.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. That would be Joe.
Yeah. It's what's his name? Bell.
Oh, he had a
Bell. Somebody said he had a bit of a tumble.
yeah. No, he had a stroke when we were up at Duxford, which involved a bleeding on the brain.
Oh.
And he's had an operation. He's up and about, but last night he had a bad night apparently. It looks as if it might be gout. He rang Cherry at 10 to 8 this morning to say that he'd had a bad night and he got all these shooting pains up his leg from his feet. So of course he's not been able to.
Because I took him home last year because apparently whoever bought him couldn't pick him up and he was trying to get a taxi. I said, "You won't get a taxi." I said, "Look, where do you live?" He says, "Dorrington." I said, "Well, I know the RF place." He said, "Well, that's where I live." I said, "Well, I'm going past there." As it happened, I was going to Worthing that night anyway. So
Anyway, fortunately we got 2 new people turned up this morning, which was very good. Got 4 there today. Our original group that we had in 2009, which was about 14, we're down to about 3 now.
Copy, Jimmy.
No, as many as that.
quite a few. Quite a few.
Who's got the paper then, Daniel?
There he is. A bit late in there.
So when we start, when you press the buttons, I'll be ready with the primer in case we need to get
These 2, is it?
yeah. Front there.
Those 2?
Yeah.
Yeah.
George, if we stand at the front,
Yeah.
you've got to use the whole story. Yeah. is George Dunn. He used to fly the Halifax Bombers in World War II. So George is going to start the engine for us today. We've only got one of those engines. This man would have started 4 of them. So I'll let George tell a story about this particular engine and the crew.
Yes, on the night of July 28, 1943, the crew of Hanley Page Halifax, serial number JD150, took off from RAF Pocklington in Yorkshire to bomb Hamburg in Germany. At approximately 1:01 a.m, the aircraft drifted away slightly from the main bomber stream and was coned in searchlights. Almost immediately, the aircraft was attacked by an Me-110 German night fighter, and JD-150 was set on fire. The young crew battled with their stricken aircraft, finally losing that battle and crashing in the hamlet of Rendsburg in Germany. Tragically, the crew perished. In 2010, the German authorities were working at the crash site to clear unexploded bombs. During their work, 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin Mark 22 engines and a number of incendiary bombs and other wreckage was recovered. The engines were offered to the Wings Museum, or they will be scrapped. The Wings Museum liaised with both the Ministry of Defence and the Berlin Embassy to bring these engines back to England. One of those Merlin engines has now been painstakingly restored to run again. The original saxophone-style exhausts give the sound of the mighty Halifax Bomber, a sound not heard for 75 years. The names of the crew of JD-150 were as follows. Pilot, Sergeant Gordon Harry Brown, age 19. Navigator, Flying Officer William Joseph John Hitchcock, age 32. Wireless Operator, Sergeant James Wesley Rook, age 22. Air Gunner, Sergeant Edward Goff, age not known. Air Gunner, Sergeant William Roy Sinclair, age 22. Flight Engineer, Sergeant John Alfred Tyler, age 25. And Bomb Aimer, Flying Officer Robert William Allison, age 22. We'll remember them.
We will remember them.
All set.
All set. Clear prop.
Okay.
Yep. can't hear very well, but another clap for George Dunn, please. The afternoon one will run smoother now.
Okay, folks, I'm just going to try and get a couple of words with George. George, absolute honour, sir, to meet with you, and you are live across the world right now. How absolutely fantastic! So, if you could just tell us which squadron did you fly with? Was it Mark III Halifax Squadron?
No, Mark II. I did 2 second pilot trips on 10 Squadron. Every pilot had to do 2 trips with an experienced crew before they were allowed to take their own crew. And I did those at 10 Squadron at Melbourne. And then after my heavy conversion unit on the Halifaxes, I started off with 76 Squadron at Linton-on-Ouse. And then we got, when they formed the Canadian 6th Group, they gave them all the peacetime stations, and we were kicked out to something a little bit down the lower grade in Nissen Huts. That was at Holme Spalding Moor, still in Yorkshire.
Yes. Yeah. And so the Halifax Bomber itself, obviously a very sturdy aircraft.
Yes, yeah, it was a very good aircraft. Not as powerful as a Lancaster, but even so, it was. And I didn't have any problems with it at all.
She was able to withstand quite a lot of.
Yes, no doubt about that. It didn't get the credit it should have had, the Halifax, but of course there you are. It did a very good job with Bomber Command.
So how many missions did you fly with your squadrons?
With Halifaxes, I flew 30.
And all into enemy territory?
Nearly all. Most of my trips were to the Ruhr. I did 1 trip to Italy, to Milan, and 1 to Berlin in Halifax. And then as a second tour, I went on to Mosquitoes.
So your missions all at night and
all at night, yeah.
And taking off with all of your pals and other colleagues who flew on those missions.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you have any instances where you were under attack or had to corkscrew?
No, we were very lucky. We got hit by flak a couple of times, but we didn't have any problems with night fighters. We did get coned once with searchlights, which involved quite a lot of manoeuvring to get out of the cone. But other than that, no, we had quite a good tour. I mean, there were some hairy moments, but we didn't get any serious damage.
Of course, a lot of the time, you being a pilot, I did hear reports that the Halifax was prone to swinging on takeoff. Was that?
No. Okay. Well, you only speak from personal. From personal experience, and I didn't have any problem with it.
But it was one of the most dangerous points of a mission, was actually taking off with a full bomb load, a full fuel load.
It certainly was. Until you reach what they called safety speed, anything could happen, which was usually about 120 miles an hour. Once you got to that, then you felt you were okay.
And your crew, we just heard today, JD 150 had a very young crew, a pilot, captain who was just 19 years of age.
Yeah.
What was the age of your crew?
Well, my rear gunner was the youngest, he was 19. Bomb aimer and myself were 20. And then we had a gap between the rest of the crew, were sort of 27, 28, 30. So there was a gap between.
But that's incredible, a 20-year-old commanding an aircraft with 27-year-olds.
I know.
But back then it was, I think, a little bit different, that people respected each other, didn't they?
Oh yes, I mean, basically it was teamwork. If you relied on everybody relied on the other chap to do his job properly, and that I think made all the difference to getting through a tour.
Yes, and you flew with the same crew right the way through the whole tour?
Yeah. Occasionally you had a different gunner or navigator, perhaps due sickness or something like that, but basically the same crew the whole time.
And your life on the station itself was I've read stories of hitting the pub every time you got back, seeing if you could get back in time before the pubs close.
Yeah, well, we were lucky because my flight engineer, his wife and his mother ran a pub. And he also owned a car, a Morris 8. So we seven of us used to pile in the Morris 8 on nights off and drive over to Horsforth near Leeds to have a session at the pub was called the Old Ball.
Absolutely fantastic. And in those days you'd had a few drinks and you'd drive back.
No, nobody worried in those days. No. I mean, Ferris, the driver, he was pretty good. He was pretty careful.
Yes.
He was the flight engineer.
Right, so he was a sensible one.
Yeah.
And of course, the crew themselves, especially the navigator, such a lot of pressure on his shoulders to
absolutely.
get you to the target in the dark.
Absolutely. I mean, we did have what they called a G box, which was a radar assisted aid, and that of course made all the difference. But of course you did get that would only operate to about 5 degrees east, so then of course it was dead reckoning navigation. I had a very good navigator, excellent.
Which was a good thing for because I did hear a lot of stories of navigators who would get their crew lost and sometimes make it back, sometimes not.
Yeah.
So your last mission, where was your last mission? Do you remember?
My last mission was to a place called Cassel, which was near the Ruhr, and that was we were hoping that we would get a fairly what you might call an easy trip, but it wasn't. In actual fact, we lost over 46 aircraft on my last mission. We lost four aircraft from our squadron. So
when you got back, it was a sigh of relief.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what did you do after you completed your 30 ops?
Went back to an OTU instructing on Wellingtons, and then after about a year on that, volunteered to go back and do a second tour on mosquitoes.
Did you really?
Yeah.
And you
halfway through the tour when the war finished.
So wow, you flew the Mosquito.
Yeah.
With your it was a navigator who's just sat right next to you, wasn't it?
That's right.
Very
just the two of us. Oh yes, there wasn't very much room. Yeah.
And a very was that low bombing missions or?
No, well over 20,000, 26,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
So not much of a bomb load on the Mosquito.
4 500s. Yeah.
So precision bombing.
Yeah, it was to keep I was doing Berlin mostly, and it was just to keep the Berliners on their toes, And of course, it occupied people that otherwise might have been fighting on the fronts or something like that.
Yes. Well, George, thank you so much. We can't thank you enough for your kind words and for your dedication and commitment.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming. And what was it like just firing up this engine again?
Oh, because I've done it before when I first did it. It's great to hear that noise of the old Merlin. Yeah, you never forget that.
Never forget that. And of course, you were the man who pressed those buttons at the beginning of every mission to start those engines.
Yeah.
And of course, your ground crew were important too.
Oh, absolutely. We had a marvellous ground crew. They were very, very thorough in their work, and they looked after their crews.
And they looked after their aircraft like it was their own.
Yes, yeah. If you brought an aircraft back with a hole in it, you were in trouble.
George, thank you so much.
Okay, pleasure.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Cheers, thank you. Wow, what about that, folks? What about that? What a legend, an absolute. Now, when you talk about legends, that's a legend, isn't it, right there? Okay, well, guys, I'm going to sign off now. Chilly, are you there? I'm just going to quickly switch this round and just say goodbye. Oh, I tell you what, my arm really aches, I have to say, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed it. Look out for notifications tomorrow. Keep on your toes tomorrow. We might be bringing you something tomorrow afternoon. But in the meantime, thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed your day here at the Wings Museum in Sussex. Go and check their website. Is it wingsmuseum.co? Okay, you've got the website there. wingsmuseum.co.uk, where you need to go. And we've heard already there are a lot of people who are going to come here to this tiny little gem in the heart of Sussex. So get yourselves down here, very close to the M23 motorway. So you'll be able to get here very easily indeed. And they're looking for volunteers as well. So, yeah, give the guys here at Wings Museum a call or drop them an email, and I'm sure they'll be very happy to chat to you. Guys, I've got to go because my arm's going to collapse. Look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you real soon. Take care. Bye-bye. I'm clear, yeah? Oh, okay. Oh. Wow, what about that? Did that go well or what? What about the end? Okay, go. So there you go, folks. Sorry about that little test card at the end there. Something that you're quite familiar with now, it has to be said. Wow, well, what can I say? Something totally different bringing you there from Big Jet TV. And always an honour to cover anything like that on Big Jet TV. I have a huge amount of respect for those chaps as they were then, literally boys, youngsters. Didn't really have time to enjoy their teenage years, and of course so many losing their lives and putting their lives on the line for us, much like the guys and girls in the frontline services doing right now for us. So thank you once again to Cherry Grieveson for arranging that whole thing for us. Of course, to Dan and his brother Kevin from the Wings Museum for allowing us behind the scenes, and for Dan walking us around the museum as well. I hope you enjoyed all the exhibits and all the artifacts that they've got there. It is open 6 days a week, obviously not at the moment, but and in terms of the engine runs, that's something that you'll have to check in on the website for updates on when they're going to be running those, because it's not sort of like every week that they do it, and of course every time the engine goes through a run like that, something so old as that needs to go through a full check just to make sure that everything is still running properly. So all the plugs will have to come out, the oil will have to be changed, and so on and so forth. So probably like once a month, I would imagine that they're probably planning to do that. And of course, thank you so much to George Dunn for his time and effort, and of course him having served during the war for us, And of course, I got it a little bit wrong. They were Merlin 22s, double X being two X's, X being 10. So two X's, it was a Merlin 22. So many different variants of that engine during the war, but that particular one in the Halifax Mark II aircraft, and of course the Mosquito as well, Spitfire, Hurricane, Blenheim. Oh, actually, no, Blenheim's didn't. Blenheim's, from memory, had a radial engine. But anyway, so really appreciate that. Really appreciate your time. Great to hear some of the old names coming through from him, where he was based out of Holmon, Spalding Moor. There's some great old airfields that are still the areas are still active. The villages around them. If you go on Google Earth, you can still see a lot of the overgrown runways and dispersal areas of some of the old airfields that have now been reclaimed by either farms or nature itself. But if you really explore it, like I've done, I went to quite a few of these. Metheringham was one of them, where there was the old control tower was still just about intact. Went in there, found an old bottle, which was obviously an old sauce bottle from way back in the day, just lying there in the corner of one of the rooms, and an old tuning dial from a radio set or something like that. So just sort of like little things like that. I just love my amateur archaeology. I love archaeology and history. It's such a fascinating historical subject to jump on. And of course, I mentioned last night when I dug up that Halifax down in those woods in Sussex, in Plumpton, Sussex, near the racecourse. I also dug up some flint arrowheads as well, which it's just incredible, and they were blatant arrowheads as well. So we, very fortunate to find stuff like that. But anyway, there you go, folks. Listen, I'm going to give you some time to grab your lunch and have a bit of a break. We'll be back at around about 7 p.m. tonight, bringing you something a little bit special. Got a message. Let me just grab that. Is it? Okay. Is it better if I stand here in this in the shade? Okay. So I got a message this morning, folks, from one of our viewers. Actually, Russell Sprout is his username. Ryan is his name. He writes to say, where are we now? Hold on a minute, just bear with me, folks. Okay, he says, quick question. Wonder if you could help. And this is from Ryan Gray, a member of Big Jet TV. I happened to be passing London Heathrow in May last year. I was in the area on business, actually at a meeting with BA at their HQ not far away. And I swung by the Renaissance on the off chance, and you were there filming the midweek show. I popped to Starbucks to grab us both a coffee and managed to get back to the hotel just as you were pulling away. You kindly stopped, however, and had a quick chat. I remember this as well. I let you know that on the coming Saturday, the 25th of May 2019, I was departing London Heathrow for JFK on a Swan, the Virgin A340-600, of course, VS153 at 13:30 hours departure, if I remember. Our first, and I fear sadly now our last time ever flying on the Swan. We were heading off on a dream break to celebrate my eldest daughter's 18th birthday. You called Jilly, and while I was there, you agreed to do a double header show so that during the afternoon show you could capture our departure. Jerry, I've never actually seen that footage. However, I know you were there filming, as I saw you at the Renaissance on top of the van as we thundered down the runway. So I'm wondering if you could either put that show out as a replay to add to the shows you're already doing now, or could you simply send us the clip of the departure? I'd like to add it to my JFK file to show my wife and kids. It would be awesome. And there we go. Thanks for the continued amazing work you and Jilly are doing at the moment. You're making the darker days oh so very much bearable. And kind regards, Ryan. Ryan, your wish is our command. We will be bringing you that show, that bonus show that we did last year in May, the afternoon show on Saturday, and this is the a big thank you, big Virgin thank you on the A346 as well. Is it V? What is it? V what, Gilly? VNAP. So get ready for that, folks. Ryan, get yourself ready and get your folks ready around the TV this afternoon, and we'll bring you that at 7 p.m. tonight, folks. Lots more to come on Big Jet TV, but for now, take a break. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you later. Toodaloo.